So, you don't believe that Littlefinger, the guy we later learn killed John Aaron, could have been working in earnest to help Ned up until the very end, up until his betrayal in the throne room on the day of the coup. Yet, you're here, hopefully after having watched part 4 of Stannis That Peach in the Battle of Wind, the short Kingmaker. You're here with questions. Hello, and welcome to Moon Messages. I'm Greg, a.k.a. Moonman. This is a special bonus unlocked from the Patreon and extended. You're about to hear the full and extended version of Moon Messages Episode 3, Who Killed John Aaron, and even Episode 3.1, which was only ever on the Patreon. The first 20 minutes or so of Episode 3, Who Killed John Aaron, was on YouTube. This is all of that, plus some extra thoughts from me here at the top about how this relates to the Littlefinger episode that just dropped, and some, at the end, maybe some more revisions on how I'm thinking about some of these issues now, to the extent that they've changed. Because I must admit, this topic does bear somewhat on the Littlefinger episode, which just dropped on the main channel. I mean, I say just dropped. I'm recording this after 4 o'clock on Friday, July 3rd. And supposedly that episode, after a year and a half, is going to drop at 5 o'clock. I might just push it back a little further at the last second, just so I can get this done and up to be like the next thing you watch. We'll see. But yeah, admittedly, it does bear on. But yeah, in any case, these topics turn out to be related. Now here on Moon Messages, this is a second channel here. It's your first time. When I have the time and inclination, I do some theories and discussions of a looser nature than the very overproduced stuff on the main channel that I spend years working on. Too long, obviously. Stuff that I may never get around to doing a full treatment of on the main channel, in the main series, or, whatever. Things I want to talk about, I'm a little impatient to on a looser basis, without doing as much production, but without doing as much thinking and research either. Sometimes I get things wrong for that reason. I already think I'm wrong about the topic of Moon Messages Episode 1, though some of my thinking was right. If you want to know who actually hired the Catspaw to kill Bran, follow the link up top to Sharp Green Ideas video, where at long last he breaks it wide open. I'm totally serious. It's an analysis that I really admire, and a way of thinking about these stories that is correct, which is to say these mysteries have not been solved, and you can't rely on, the point I'm always making, you can't rely on the perspectives of the flawed, imperfect, and often ignorant characters, and you can't rely on extraneous things either, like stuff the author has said, the author of a mystery story, that closes down a lot of avenues that, and Sharp Green Ideas took frankly, when he lays it out, an extremely obvious avenue that just, for lots of reasons, because it's perfectly not shown to you in the books, but makes such perfect logical sense, fits in with my analysis of the politics completely. And it is kind of an obvious thing. It's something people must have thought when first reading. This was one of the suspects. So when you're reading A Game of Thrones, the book, the first time without knowing anything, but it gets pushed away for a lot of reasons, and certainly it's not in the otherwise in the sort of contemporary theory and analysis conversation. Back to Who Killed John Aaron, but seriously, watch that next. Part 4 of the main series, where I'm reanalyzing the politics of A Song of Ice and Fire, Littlefinger, how he fits into the Battle of Wind. The idea, right, of this series, we're re-examining the politics, and one key question we're asking is, who is it so strange to ask, who can know about the Targaryen restoration plot? And if we ask that question, does a person know this by whatever method? Does it make things make a bit more sense? Does it open up the story? You may, after now 4 episodes, you may be getting the idea that this is fundamental to how I think the story is written. I think like Aegon coming back is, this Targaryen restoration plot is like utterly central and like kind of drives everything from the very beginning, whereas it seems like it comes out of nowhere in A Dance with Dragons. It's actually heavily foreshadowed. Um, not not easily guessable, though people did, but very foreshadowed. Um, and Littlefinger, to review the thesis of I'll be going into more detail on this on the Patreon, like some long discussions, but the idea is, yeah, he knows he's working in various ways in reaction to that at all times, including ultimately this answers the question of what's he doing with Harrenhal. Now, when I set out to do this episode, I set out to tell a much simpler story. This was a very difficult one to write because Littlefinger turns out is a very complex topic. He shows up kind of everywhere, and um, he has a lot going on. And as I try to identify, as I try to explain, like his political motivations, what he's thinking about, like how he needs his plan is to get his hands on Harrenhal through various ways, and ultimately be at the center of the new politics of the Seven Kingdoms. He also, I come to that, and I kept coming to this question of like, well, okay, when? When does he start going for that plan? Because that's kind of crucial. It's certainly in my thinking of this, of how to, it's crucial in human motivation. It's crucial in political motivation. Like, the conditions, the timing matters. And so I kept having to ask this question and really nail it down. And a lot of, what I come up with in the video is what I had been thinking all along, but I really had to like dive deep into the details, and you ends up, it just took over the video such that it really ends up a lot of the meat of it to get to this, for me to feel like this is paid off, is about like tracing his motivations mostly through the first book, but right up to Storm of Swords in the end, but especially like what is going on in these crucial moments in which Littlefinger is involved, like when he's ostensibly seems to be helping Ned, but we don't trust it. Ned doesn't trust it, and then ultimately turns on Ned. It ends up having to be about that. Now, I just leave the issue of the murder of Jon Arryn almost completely off the table. I sort of cheekily like mention it, but I don't mention that it's Littlefinger because it's not. That's what you're gonna hear me talk about today. And the problem is that's just too big a conversation to get into. It's a lot to convince people. I don't know that, you're not going to be convinced listening to me today. I don't think, I mean, there's a lot more I could go into. There's a much more convincing case I could make, but it would take a long time and it would be a whole video. Like, and this is, this is much looser. So now you might say, well, gosh, Moonman, that kind of undermines this whole idea, doesn't it? That like, Littlefinger was a good guy all along, but then later we find out he was actually murdered Jon Arryn long before the story begins. And so like, could he be later on Ned's side? Fair enough. I would say a couple of things that like, it's not about good guys and bad guys. He could have his own particular motivation. He could have his own plan that I just don't mention that is he's doing before, we get into the stuff we get into the video. And then that involves killing Jon Arryn so he can marry Lysa. And then all this other stuff happens. If that helps you, if I really can't get over on you with this idea that he doesn't kill Jon Arryn, of which I'm completely certain. I mean, I'm very certain of this. Then, think of it that way if you need to. But look, the mysteries are not solved. These are mysteries that go back to the beginning of the story, and a story that is just like barely dipping its toe into the start of the second act in what we have now, or arguably the second act hasn't started because it's a little fuzzy from how he planned it. and I say planned. Um, you know, if in part of your analysis of these things is to be thinking about like how he's making it up as it goes along because of like his gardener process, um, wrong. Uh, that those things he says about architects and gardeners are about process. They're not about plot. And I think it's really misunderstood to the extent that I would say it's not a useful idea for analysis. It doesn't really mean anything plot wise. It's just talking about his process. Like you know, people in the comments of the first time I put this out, were skeptical. Like, well, after 3 books, he finally solved this mystery, and you're saying like he didn't. Um, yeah, man. Like, back up. Like, this is a big, mysterious, convoluted political drama about intrigue and deceit. Okay. Um, why would you solve the opposite instinct is, I think, more useful. Why solve the the main mysteries of a story that he has a plan for that is going somewhere? Now, if you don't think it is, if you think these are just sort of episodes going along that he's making up out of his ass, like, which I don't really understand how you can read it and think that, but whatever. Then I guess, and maybe you think of this like TV, which of course is a lot of people's entree into it. That's how TV works. You go along, stuff happens, one thing after another. They make it up as they go along. They solve some mysteries. They introduce some new ones, and it's just like it's just a world we're living in. That's not what this is. This is a story. It has a beginning, middle, and end. We've seen the beginning. That's it. And these are key things that have to do with the stories these characters are going to live out and their very motivations. Something I don't get into in the following discussions you're going to hear is like much of like Littlefinger's feelings about things. One thing I get wrong in the first discussion and then correct myself is that I think when Lysa says, "Oh, it was me uh, who you slept with," that he's thinking that he doesn't realize he had ever been intimate with Lysa. But of course, that's not the case. And I correct that in the last one. I just gotten confused. But the key idea is true. The key thing I was trying to get at is that he's getting this shocking revelation, something probably kind of defining for him, that he was intimate with Kat, and finding out that this was always a lie that he told himself because it was a lie that Lysa let him believe, and didn't correct and let him believe in the moment, of course, in his intoxication. That's like a shocking blow to him, I think, emotionally. And something I don't, and I mentioned that in the context of like, this is setting us up for he is learning things he's never heard before. And then that should be our clue, part of our clue that when she says, "We murdered John Aaron together," that is something he's also hearing for the first time. And, but I don't mention something that listening back to it occurs to me now to talk about, which is that the other thing he's hearing is that Lysa murdered John Aaron, someone he thinks the Lannisters killed. He thinks Cersei killed because he was going to expose the incest and upset the alliance and her family and herself and her kids. That's what he thinks. I actually another thing that's changed. I realized I figured out more is that there is this confusion about like, well, did he write? Well, in the same maybe sentence, she's saying we killed John Aaron, and then I wrote to my sister and told her it was Cersei who did it, just like you said. And well, I should save that for the end. We'll get back into that at the end. But the point is, he's also hearing. The point is, he's also hearing that she killed John Aaron. John Aaron, his friend, his mentor, the guy who brought him to King's Landing and rose him up, who he served as his little finger all along, the little finger of the hand. Yes, in the story, he the nickname comes from River Run. It's something different, but I promise you that in the author's original thinking, the name Littlefinger in his head as a character comes from being the little finger of the hand. This is something that I'll get into later in the Battle of Wind series that is elided in the first book, is how close John Arryn and Littlefinger were, I think. And that he kind of takes out a lot of details that could be in there that you learn more slowly over time, and that some that you just have to step back and infer, that would lead you to realize, oh, John Arryn really liked and respected this guy, and the feeling was probably mutual, and they had a good relationship, and Peter was good at his job serving Robert and John. This is taken out of the book, these details, because it's easier to mistrust Littlefinger along with Ned, and thus not, it's just whatever that balance was. That's how the author settled it in, with the publication of A Game of Thrones, his final draft. He took out some of these details. He changes at some point along the way the Littlefinger nickname, which he likes and wants to keep because probably he's been thinking about the character that way for all this time. But he's like, it just connects him too obviously. It makes you think more consciously about him being John Arryn's right-hand man. Even though there's some details, mostly in the next book, but a few in the first one where it makes clear, well, yeah, that would kind of have to be the case. But you're not thinking about it directly. You're kind of he's just one of the guys there, and he's a sleazy one. Okay, so without further ado, Littlefinger didn't kill John Arryn, which, I think does reinforce my thinking in part 4 of Stannis That Peach in the Battle of Wind, that this is a guy who this stuff is just kind of happening to, and he's reacting as best he can, trying to continue what John Arryn was doing to save Robert's rule, to save his own ass, if nothing else. Though there are other things that I don't get into, other more human motivations for Littlefinger, and up into including getting Ned to come south and trying to help Ned continue that work, and then trying to help Ned survive through everything, even when it seems clear like the Baratheon dynasty is done for. It does reinforce that, and that makes it a stronger argument, certainly. So let's get into the discussion, and then hours from now, when you've listened to all that, at the end, I have some notes here of things to kind of update and underline and sort of new thinking on a number of topics related to all this. Thanks so much. Who really killed John Arryn? Yes, I'm serious. But wasn't it Lysa Arryn, his wife? I mean, she said so. Well, yeah, presumably. The real question is, who put her up to it? Okay, sure, she said it was Littlefinger. She clearly believes it was Littlefinger. Littlefinger never admits to it. So, Moonman, I know you're asking, how is it that she would believe it was Littlefinger if it wasn't? If there's something more here? Well, we might also ask, how did Littlefinger keep up this romance, adultery, and eventually murder plot inside the Red Keep and Robert's court? How is it that he took the incredible risk of trusting the unstable and unreliable Lysa Arryn in a conspiracy to murder one of the most powerful people in the realm? It's nuts. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what's really going on, I think, in Littlefinger's mind, what's really going on in Lysa's, and yes, who really killed John Arryn, as well as, other points to get into, like, for example, the implications of the Redditor G. Steph's research into the very late drafts of A Game of Thrones, which could suggest that Lysa being the killer was a very late addition. It could suggest that. G. Steph and others have suggested that it does. And quite a bit more, I think. But first, I'm Greg, aka Moonman, and this is Moon Messages, Episode 3. It's a podcast wherein I get to discuss all my other thoughts and theories on A Song of Ice and Fire that won't make it into my overproduced videos in my lifetime anyway. Evidence of this can be found in the fact that part 3 of Stannis, That Peach and the Battle of Wind, my over-elaborate series on basically a novel political analysis of the whole song from the ground up, has, at the time of this recording, still not been released. What can I say? I have some good editing days, and I have a lot more bad editing days. So I thought it would be nice to talk more Varys and Littlefinger. If you are listening on Patreon, thank you so much for your support of this vital work in song studies. If you're watching on YouTube, you get to see the parade of original house banners by my friend and collaborator Erin O, waving about as you listen. Some of those you will be seeing in there, you'll be seeing for the first time. If somehow you found this channel without having seen the main work I'm doing on YouTube, check out the link. What's Stannis really up to, etc. Okay then. Littlefinger's master plan. Kill Jon Arryn. Marry Lysa, take over in the Vale. And for some reason, Harrenhal as well. Now, the bigger strokes of Littlefinger's master plan, or such that it is, whatever it is actually going to be the subject of part 4 of Stannis, That Peach, and the Battle of Wind. So we're going to sidestep most of that. But the murder of Jon Arryn doesn't necessarily intersect with that much at all, which is what I'm going to be discussing today, because Littlefinger was as surprised as you or I to hear Lysa say he was involved. That's what I'm going to try and convince you of today. We'll see. Of course, in talking about these more outlandish theories of mine, I hope if you listen to the whole thing, particularly if you go to Patreon, and really get the entire discussion, I hope and I know some people have started to become a little bit convinced at least. I hope, it's evident that I'm thinking about these things seriously. Of course, I'm also aware that, I'm trying to convince people with the main series of some pretty outlandish things that I've put a lot more time into thinking about. The purpose of this podcast is to do something a little more off the cuff, with a little less rigorous research, and of course, easier to produce. But of course, it's in the back of my mind is that I am, by putting out these more outlandish claims without backing it up as well, I'm sort of undermining my credibility with the main Battle of Wind theory. And well, so be it. That's the nature of whatever bizarre project I'm engaged in here. Because yeah, like I say, I'm going to try and convince you that Littlefinger was bowled over as much as we were in the last Sansa chapter of The Storm of Swords. So to start, maybe it's important to recognize and remember, though, even though I only read the books at the end of 2022, I wish I'd gotten to this sooner. What if the author puts out the next book and I haven't finished getting all my theories online? What a tragedy that would be. Take your time, Mr. Martin. Take your time. Take another 3 or 4 years if necessary, please. It's important, we maybe recall that until that moment at the end of A Storm of Swords, the third book, who killed Jon Arryn was a still a real mystery, or something potentially that readers still thought the Lannisters did, that Cersei did, or and my impression, though, how would you even begin to do this kind of research? Is that there was speculation at times about the Lannisters, sure, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's more complicated than that. Maybe that's misdirection. And the two most enigmatic and mysterious schemers, Littlefinger and Varys, I do think came up in conversation as possibly being involved. Storm of Swords comes around. There's a lot of revelations in that book. A lot of big twists and turns, and one of them is Lysa. Shortly before her death, Peter says, "There's no cause for all these tears." Of course, she's with Sansa on the edge of the moon door. "Tears, tears, tears," she sobbed hysterically. "No need for tears, but that's not what you said in King's Landing.
You told me to put the tears in John's wine, and I did, for Robert and for us. And I wrote Caitlin and told her the Lannisters had killed my lord husband, just as you said. That was so clever. You were always clever. I told father that. I said, Peter's so clever. He'll rise. He'll rise high. He will. He's sweet and gentle, and I have his little baby in my belly. Was it clever? Was it clever to involve Lysa Arryn in this? What an insane risk. If you're thinking about Littlefinger as like a schemer and a mastermind, and I, I do think he has big plans, and I do think he's a real player of the Game of Thrones, and I do think he has enormous ambition, and of course is absolutely willing to murder people. I mean, that's not even a question, really. But the question is like, how does he take this risk? That's what, at least one of the things that started me wondering about this. Like what is the actual mechanics of this? Like, so they've been carrying on. She goes on to say, like, we waited for so long. You know, what she's kind of imagining, you start to, like, obviously, okay, he's been conning her then. So what's the story here? He's been leading her along for some time and eventually starts working her up, promising, like, okay, eventually we're going to be together. No, we're going to be together sometime. And then eventually he's like, well, the thing that's standing in our way is your husband. So, okay, I have a plan. We can be together. This will work. You just have to put this poison in his wine. And then he'll be gone, and we will eventually, my master plan will come to fruition. We will marry. And that's, yeah, that makes sense, some sense on its face, until you start to think about, like, how would that work? These are courtiers in a court. They live in a castle together. Are they having secret meetings together? So ignore the spider for now. Set that aside. The fact that you can't escape Varys and his little birds. Set that aside. Even just like being in like courtiers in this court, like, what is going on? Are they meeting in secret? Like, is it just stolen whispers? Like, that's already seems a hard thing to keep up. Then you add to that, John Arryn knows Lysa was pregnant before they married. She says this, actually. She tells Sansa, Father said I ought to thank the gods that so great a lord as John Arryn was willing to take me soiled, but I knew it was only for the swords. Well, yeah, maybe. I mean, it may also be because he was desperate for an heir, and it was important. It was actually a kind of a bonus that to know that she was like proved fertile in a way. But he knew. Which, does he know it's Littlefinger? Well, I mean, if Hoster Tully didn't tell him, it wouldn't be hard to figure it out. He was kicked out of River Run around that time, and Lysa is, responsible for his rise. It's Lysa, like, lobbying her husband on Littlefinger's behalf that gets him his various appointments, that ends him up in the place of power that he is in the Robert Court. So, like, how would it be hard to figure out? Littlefinger's got to be conscious of this, right? So, like, I would actually start from a point knowing nothing else but that history of imagining that Littlefinger would probably be steering as clear of Lysa Arryn as possible. He would probably be smart to never find himself in a room alone with her. Like, he owes everything to John Arryn and Lysa, and like he can't really upset that, right? So like the even suggestion of impropriety, he's already, this is like a narrow edge he's walking, being lobbied for by the woman who loves you, whose husband is, as a result of this, showing you favor. Like that's a narrow edge to walk. And so I would imagine that he would be avoiding her as much as possible, certainly in private. He's not going to be stopping by and not going to be like certainly seen like dipping in and whispering. Or that would be my natural assumption based on those facts. And that is actually very key because I think that's exactly what was going on. And it makes sense and actually makes the whole plot possible. That he's basically avoiding Lysa Arryn all these years, except maybe little moments here and there, moments of, inevitable interactions of state, in the court. Maybe they do out of propriety have him over for dinner once a year or something. I don't know. Maybe who knows. But that's that's like a baseline assumption. If that's all you knew about Littlefinger's backstory, the next piece, and if I contradicted myself earlier in this, again, the nature of this, I'm kind of doing this off the cuff. Littlefinger, and this is the next key piece, is that Littlefinger doesn't know that he and Lysa were ever intimate. Now, he does know. What he does know is that Lysa's always been in love with him, and that is reason enough when your benefactor, the hand of the king, is showing you favor and is raising you up and giving you these opportunities, and you know that his wife is in love with you and has been since childhood, and occasionally maybe even surreptitiously bats eyes at him or something. Maybe. I'll get to that. This would be reason enough to avoid her and keep everything above board and never be doing anything to be suspected. Because that's a key thing. He goes around telling everybody, rather boldly, that he was intimate with Caitlin at River Run. Even being so repulsive as to, brag about being her first in a typically Westerosi way. Of course, Lysa tells Sansa in this chapter at the end of A Storm of Swords that he was drunk. He said Kat's name, but it was always her. And so we get let in, and this is key. We're let in on this secret about the relationship between Littlefinger and Lysa that Littlefinger doesn't know. He is let in on a big revelation. Well, first we are, and we get to process that through. She tells Sansa that he said Kat's name, but it was really with her. He was drunk. Then she tells him the passage. Let's see here. She doesn't love you the way I have. I have always loved you. I've proved it, haven't I? Tears ran down her aunt's puffy red face. I gave you my maiden's gift. I would have given you a son too, but they murdered him with moon tea. And she gives the recipe for terminating a pregnancy. That's past and done, Lysa. Lord Hoster's dead, and his old maester as well. Littlefinger moved closer. This is a complete side note, but that, for reasons of what Kat says in another place, that's possibly Lewin, who has been killed by this point at Winterfell. That's an aside. Anyway, so Littlefinger is hearing this for the first time. I gave you my maiden's gift. We have been intimate in the past. And there's only one time when that could have been. Littlefinger's reaction isn't to go, what? Because Littlefinger, while he is a schemer and he is a kind of mastermind, and he's hearing this for the first time, and he doesn't freak out. He does the other thing that is key to Littlefinger's character. He masterfully improvises. He goes with the flow. He's a man of opportunity and improvisation. To jump aside for a moment, this is what he does when he picks up Sansa earlier in the same book after the death of Joffrey. He improvises that he intentionally killed Joffrey when he was really trying to kill Tyrion by pumping her for information, and goes with it. He goes with the flow, and we're going to get more into that later. So here he is hearing this back at the Eyrie at the end of the Storm of Swords. He's hearing this nugget for the first time. This thing he's been going around saying one thing, but he's hearing that now that what he should be able to put together, oh, it was actually Lysa all along. And he doesn't react. He moves forward like he's always known this. And that in itself is interesting. So come later, he says, that's past and done, Lysa. Lord Hoster's dead and his old maester as well. Littlefinger moved closer. Have you been at the wine again? You ought not to talk so much. We don't want Elaine to know more than she should, do we? Or Marillion. So you can take this to mean that he's always known this, but like, I think it's more interesting that he's learning this for the first time, and that makes sense. He's been saying all this time this other thing. It's already bold enough that he's saying it, but if he's just lying, it's weird. I think this makes more sense. And it's interesting because I think it's about his reaction, that he's going with it. And he's saying like, oh, well, this has never been said out loud. He's learning for this for the first time. Sansa doesn't know this. And so he's proceeding, and his mind is moving so fast. He's proceeding already to, okay, this is a secret I've kept and lied about previously. So now how would I react? Okay, well, Lysa, and clearly Lysa believes that this is real. So he's proceeding along those lines. He's a master improviser and liar. Cat never gave you anything. It was me who got you your first post, who made John bring you to court so we could be close to one another. You promised me you would never forget that. Nor have I. We're together, just as you always wanted, just as we always wanted. Just let go of Sansa's hair. So he's talking her down. He's saying what he needs to say. We're learning that, like, again, this is where Littlefinger's power comes from. And then, a few moments later, she says, that's not what, no need for tears, but that's not what you said in King's Landing. You told me to put the tears in John's wine, and I did, for Robert and for us. And I wrote Catelyn, and I told her the Lannisters had killed my lord husband, just as you said. That was so clever. You were always so clever. I told father that. I said, Peter's so clever. He'll rise high. He will. And Littlefinger responds, Lysa, Peter sighed. After the storms we've suffered, you should trust me better. I swear I shall never leave your side again for as long as we both shall live. So he's lying. He's already decided now, like, she needs to go. Because, and not hard to see why, she is now accusing him of conspiracy to murder Jon Arryn. That's really dangerous. And she's saying it out loud. And if he was involved in that conspiracy, makes perfect sense. But I think it's more interesting that we've been set up to understand that he is learning something new in this moment about his own life from Lysa, and then learning this other new thing again. And well, then, I come back to, okay, it's interesting that he doesn't know this about it having been Lysa all this time that he was intimate with. And he's learning this for the first time. But again, okay, why does she need to be gotten out of the way? Well, she's talking this very, very dangerous information, a murder plot, she's just saying it out loud. And you got to wonder, though, and so it makes sense. It's perfectly logical that he's like, well, okay, that's the end of this. Like, she's got to go. Just out of self-preservation. But where, then, is the self-preservation in him engaging in this plot in the first place? It's just too dangerous. She's just too unreliable a person. Now you can say like, well, maybe she wasn't as like out of it and scattered before murdering her husband, and becoming really unstable in her fears and paranoia, alone at the Erie. Maybe she's also being affected by some weird telepathic forces that are keeping her up at night. There's all kinds of things that could explain that change that she would. But is it reasonable? Does it seem like we're to understand that she was actually like a stone cold operator before this? Is that what we're supposed to get from the story? I don't think so. And I cannot imagine that it makes sense, again, whether this is the author's intention or not. I can't imagine that it makes sense, really, really, that Littlefinger is meant to have said, yeah, okay, I'm going to involve Lysa Arryn in a long sort of surreptitious courtship and a plot to murder her husband. I'm going to use her. I want to get him out of the way, so I'm going to use maybe the least reliable character in the story. Add to that he knows very well, I mean, of course he does, that Varys is listening to everything. That Varys knows what goes on in the Red Keep. Now, you would, I think, be able to guess that if he's a real operator, he's a real player, like he understands this. A lot of people do. But he even says it in A Storm of Swords to Sansa on the boat when they're leaving King's Landing. He says, when he reveals that, meet me in the Godswood was his notes, right? It had to be the Godswood. No other place in the Red Keep is safe from the eunuch's little birds, or little rats, as I call them. There are trees in the Godswood instead of walls, sky above instead of ceiling, roots and dirt and rock in place of floor. The rats have no place to scurry. Rats need to hide, lest men skewer them with swords. So he knows very well that the walls of the Red Keep are not safe from the eyes of the spider. Now, this leads you to the next thought, which is, okay, notes. How does he communicate? Dangerously, yes, with Sansa. First a note, and then meetings in the Godswood. So he risks a note once, and then meetings with Dantos in the Godswood to pass information where the little birds can't hide. So this tells us, okay, Littlefinger knows and casts more doubt on like how could he keep up like any kind of relationship of any kind with her, and why would he risk it? But at the same time, it introduces one possibility: notes, letters. Still dangerous, but he does risk it once. He's no longer residing in the Red Keep. At least I think that's the case. I'd have to look at that. But either way, it's an interesting tidbit. Letters. But the interesting thing about letters in which you maybe profess your love, ask for patience, letters in which you implore your secret lover never to interact with you in person for risk of rousing suspicions, letters in which you eventually entice your pen pal lover to murder her husband, can be written by anyone. And that is what we're going to talk about over on Patreon. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. So I've raised the questions here, and I'm going to give you my answers in the second half, and we'll talk about all of that, as well as getting back to the murder of Joffrey and the nature of Littlefinger as a consummate improviser around that. We're going to talk all about that, and also about G-Steph's research into the late drafts that perhaps call into question whether Lysa was always meant to be the killer, even in the published draft of Game of Thrones, or at least right up until just before publishing it. I have thoughts on that. So a lot more to come in the Patreon. There's links. and hopefully a lot more. Please consider, checking it out. These videos, they've all I've got going on right now. Like I've been laid off for the last 2 years, which is why I've taken the bold action of doing a Patreon and hustling you all for money. The to the patrons who have signed up. I mean, I do really appreciate it. Like after most of the last 2 years not working, the like $177 I got from it last month, like was really like a significant thing. Also, if it grows, will help fund the real videos, uh, which at least one of the reasons it's taken so long, or that it could have gone faster. This part 3 was if I was able to afford more original artwork than I was, and part 4, Littlefinger's part, really can't be produced without quite a bit more of that. Anyway, so join me over there, and we'll keep talking about this. Okay, welcome to the other side of the paywall. Uh, Thank you so much for patronizing Moonman's efforts to dissect the song. The things her aunt had said just before she fell still troubled Sansa greatly. Ravings, Peter called them. My wife was mad. You saw that for yourself. Was she? Well, interesting that, he takes credit for Joffrey's death with Sansa, but not for this. That he killed. I mean, John Arryn was a friend of her father's. Like, it wouldn't make sense to. So he could be lying. He could absolutely be lying. And that's what I think is generally assumed. Like, he's lying to her here. I think he is lying. I think he, on some level, believes that if she was saying it, like, she must have killed him. And now, I wouldn't be surprised if he has an idea about who it was. It's like I was saying, once this idea of the note is introduced, he has somebody, slip her a note that says, "Meet me in the Godswood," and that introduces this idea of like, okay, if he was going to carry on this relationship with Lysa, sort of keeping her on a burner, grooming her, priming her for an eventual execution of his master plan, right, which is to bump off Jon Arryn because Jon Arryn's wife is into him, and use that to come to power in the Vale. We'll get into this in in part 4 of the series, but he already, through just more above board methods of being useful to the Baratheon court, of which Jon Arryn was a principal part. He manages to get, after the death of Jon Arryn, he manages to get a hold of Harrenhal, which, and we'll get into in that, but it seems like he wants that specifically. I think that's been a question on people's mind of like, well, does he want Harrenhal? Does he want the Vale? Does he somehow want both? What's the plan here? Well, I have ideas about that. But so that's one way to look at it. But I think it's more interesting that he's being bowled over by this information and is a consummate improviser. He's going with the flow. He's turning things to his advantage as much as he can. And yet, when the thought of the notes occurs to me, like, okay, is this how he could get past, at least for the purposes of the story, Varys the Spider's little birds listening in? Now, of course, you got to figure they'd be able to, they steal documents and copy documents. In fact, this comes up that must be Illyrio and Tyrion talking about that, about how one of their earliest practices in their espionage business was stealing or copying documents. So already that's a huge risk. And to keep it up, but let's walk through what that would look like. He starts a paper correspondence with her saying like, and he warms up to it. And eventually they're professing love to each other. But part of this in the notes is always going to be, well, we have in public or even anywhere, we're never safe. The spider's always listening, not to mention whoever else. And so we can't ever be seen being familiar or showing our love or really being suspected of anything at all. It's too dangerous. And so part of what the notes would say was be reminding her, you're doing such a good job. You keep up this brave face of hiding your love and barely ever even looking me in the eye, except when it would be impolite around court. And I'm doing the same to you, but you know that I love you. And when you think about that, again, it becomes the perfect way. If is how it would go, it becomes a perfect way for someone else to pose as Littlefinger, writing these letters, telling Lysa, never speak to me, around the court, never discuss, even in private, even if we somehow find ourselves alone on a stair, never smile at me, never say anything from the contents of these letters. That's how we lie, right? We keep up this lie by always believing it, and we only profess ourselves in these letters. Well, if that's how she was acting, then it could be anybody writing the letters telling her that. And when she sees Littlefinger, he is cold and officious and polite and courtly to her, and she does the same. And neither of them are any the wiser. Because even writing these letters back and forth is just an insane risk for Littlefinger to take. When, of course, like Varys is going to be able to get this over on him. And even before it becomes a murder plot, like this, there's no way to keep this up long term without Varys knowing, without people finding out. And then the element of, even if this was another stone cold, like ice in the veins operator, this is Lysa Arryn. You wouldn't risk it. Littlefinger wouldn't risk it. So who would risk it? Who would risk these letters being found out by Varys? Who could get these letters delivered to her in secret? Who wants to set Littlefinger up for crimes and eventually get rid of him? It's fucking Varys, obviously. Varys killed Jon Arryn. Now, I think I might have even said that in episode 1 or something. Maybe it was in the bonus conversation. I don't know. But, Varys is trying to hold the realm together. He is trying to keep the Baratheon alliance together as long as he can. Because it is, and this is key to the Battle of Wind theory, it's deeply fragile. It's been badly run. It is the foundations of the alliance, which weren't really made by Robert, are strong in that they involve marriage ties between, half the great houses who have been running the realm for the last 15 years. But, everything else is very fragile, and he's trying to hold it together until they are ready to do Targaryen restoration. Now, we know this in part or largely because we overhear, in Arya's point of view, in A Game of Thrones, we overhear this conversation between the plotters. Now, key in this is that at the time, on a first read, we have no idea that the stout man and the even bigger man in that Arya encounters and overhears down in the bowels of the Red Keep are Varys and Illyrio. I tried to think about this, and I don't know when people originally started figuring that out. There are other clues later in the book, but on a first read, you're not getting, even though Varys shows up in disguise and is described as a stout man, you're not going to pick that up on a first read. Shows up when Ned is sometime later in a later Ned chapter, shows up disguised to speak to Ned, and he's in disguise and he's described as a stout man, but like you're not putting that together in a first read. I don't know when people finally do. I almost want to say must it, it's probably not actually even. I guess in A Clash of Kings, there's a sort of more there's more scenes with Tyrion where he's in disguise, but like there's nothing that's not still not going to connect immediately. Certainly on a first read. So like, and those are two different questions. Like, what are you getting on a first read out of these books? Fucking nothing. You are not connecting that, maybe ever, right? What I mean by a first read is like a normal reader, like a reader of novels, reading through this, and then that's kind of a lens you have to look at a lot of this through if you're going to understand like the intentions, I think. So it must be, this in the histories of the annals of theorizing about these books and figuring them out, analyzing them. There is a history to this somewhere. Somebody knows, but it's got to be Storm of Swords that you finally start figuring this out. And that's, again, only if you're really thinking about it as again, just casual first read. Are you thinking back to this weird little scene in A Game of Thrones that Arya overhears? You might be, because if you're really into it and you've been wondering about this whole time. But let's go to that scene. So the stout man, the one we know to be Varys, says, "Found one bastard," one said. "The rest will come soon. A day, 2 days, a fortnight," talking about Ned's investigation. "And when he learns the truth, what will he do?" a second voice asked, in the liquid accents of the free cities. "The gods alone know," the first voice said. Arya could see a wisp of smoke, blah, 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 blah. "The fools tried to kill his son." Now that's interesting. I'm trying to square that with my ideas. Either he thinks at this point it was the Lannisters, but not necessarily Tyrion. Or he's talking a good game for, like, he knows what's going on for Illyrio. I don't know. Because again, like, he has set in motion them thinking the Lannisters are involved, which is a mistake. "I warn you, the wolf and the lion will soon be at each other's throats, whether we will it or no." So again, like, they want to delay this. He's trying to hold together the alliance. Too soon, the voice with the accent complained. "What good is war now? We are not ready. Delay. As well bid me stop time. Do you take me for a wizard?" The other chuckled. "No less." The flames licked the cold air. Tall shadows, blah, blah, blah. "What would you have me do?" asked the torchbearer, a stout man in a leather half-cape. Even in heavy boots, his feet seemed to glide soundlessly over the ground. A round, scarred face, blah, blah, blah. "If one hand can die, why not a second?" replied the man with the accent. Blah, blah, blah. "You have danced the dance before, my friend." He was no one Arya had ever seen before, certain of it. "Before is not now, and this hand is not the other." So, this is widely interpreted as, like, it's ambiguous, and he's maybe he is like implying to Illyrio that he killed John Aaron, but he didn't really. Or Illyrio doesn't know, and Illyrio heard about it. This is the first time he's talked to Varys face to face in a while, and he's assuming it was Varys. And Varys isn't disabusing him of it, because again, if you're figuring out in the same book, A Storm of Swords, that this was Varys and Illyrio, well, then also at the end, in the same last chapters of the book that you're figuring that out, you're learning, oh, well, it was Lysa and Littlefinger. And so he, like, gives you the clue and then takes it away, is my argument. But of course, the more straightforward interpretation is that, like, the misdirection is that, like, you're supposed to think this, I guess, for a few chapters. Again, I don't think on a first read, even on a first read, unless you're really watching for it, you're just desperate. And some, at this point, by the third book, some readers are certainly going like, I got to find out who that, who was talking in that hallway. But in general, like, I don't think that's the way to think about how it's written. So, like for a few chapters at the end of the book, you're supposed to think that it was Varys who killed Jon Arryn, and then have that sort of rug pulled out. I mean, maybe, but I don't like that. I don't really buy that. So to go on here, so he's saying, look, that's a different story. I can't do it. That's a whole other question. Does he just not want to do it? Varys does seem to have other plans for Ned. I think I would say he's thinking politically about this. He made the calculation. The best thing to do here is to get rid of Jon Arryn, because Jon Arryn needs to be got rid of eventually anyway. Whereas with Ned Stark, it's better to keep Ned Stark around long term. For the long term plan, it's better that he's actually around to govern the North. Or, later his plans change again, and at least keep him alive and keep the Starks on side. I would say that's what he's thinking here. Of course, his thinking has to keep evolving. Perhaps so, the forked beard replied. Nonetheless, we must have time. The princess is with child. The call will not stir himself. See, this is the problem with doing this so off the cuff. Is like this. I'm identifying like something that I got wrong in a previous podcast, which is I started reading this passage at, if he does not bestir himself soon, it will be too late, and not read like up 2 paragraphs, where it's actually clear when he says, if he does not bestir himself soon, they're talking about Khal Drogo. And I was speculating, well, like that, maybe they're talking about, Connington and Aegon, basically. It doesn't matter. It doesn't change the logic. I was trying to add more to, because I'm saying the 2 player, well, we'll get to that. So it doesn't change the thinking, but, that's the pitfall here. This is no longer a game for 2 players. Of course, I have a lot to say about that. I think that's extremely key. I think that's needs real reevaluation after Dance with Dragons, and I may have already talked about that on this podcast, but I will drop very briefly hint at my analysis of it in part 3, which will drop soon, of the Battle of Wind. Stannis Baratheon and Lysa Arryn have fled beyond my reach, and the whispers say they are gathering swords around them. The Knight of Flowers writes Highgarden, urging his lord father to send his sister to court. The girl is a maid of 14, sweet and beautiful and tractable, blah, 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 blah. Littlefinger, the gods only know what game Littlefinger is playing. Yet Lord Stark's the one who troubles my sleep. He has the bastard, he has the book, and soon enough he'll have the truth. So he's talking about Ned continuing Jon Arryn's investigation, learning this information that will blow up the alliance. And here's the motive. He's saying, this is bad. We need, like, and he goes on. He's saying, and now his wife has abducted Tyrion Lannister thanks to Littlefinger's meddling. Again, we talked about this before. I'll go on. Lord Tywin will take that for an outrage. Jaime has a queer affection for the imp. If the Lannisters move north, that will bring in the Tullys as well. Delay, you say. Make haste, I reply. Even the finest of jugglers cannot keep 100 balls in the air forever. So again, like, while they want the realm to collapse and roll over for Aegon eventually, right now they're not ready for that. So Varys is doing everything he can to hold the realm together, to hold the alliance together, to keep everything stable. And as he says here, Jon Arryn's investigation that Ned is continuing is a threat to that. And so there is your motive for killing Jon Arryn. Again, he seems to imply or not disabuse Illyrio of what sounds like an assumption that he did kill Jon Arryn. But again, if you believe what Lysa Arryn is saying and take it at face value, you then look at this, as a kind of rug pull. More likely, you make that connection. Before you have ever on a first read, before you've ever connected this conversation to Varys, you've already heard Lysa Arryn explain the murder of Jon Arryn. And so now you're going back, once you're theorizing and analyzing and you're looking, you're going, oh, this is Varys and Illyrio. And you might not even piece, you wouldn't even piece this as Illyrio. If I'm getting this wrong, this is stuff that's hard to research. You need like an old head to pick this apart, but or do like real, and it's hard because it's not just researching the book. It's like you got to research like what connections did people make. That's a real like leap of imagination to imagine like what did people put together, how and when. It's possible, but you may get it wrong. But I just thinking off the top of my head here, you may not even piece together that's Illyrio till Dance with Dragons, till until Tyrion shows up with Illyrio having been sent there by Varys. So anyway, you've already probably seen and heard Lysa Arryn explain the murder of Jon Arryn, and so this you're trying to fit into this is misdirection, where in fact you never had actually been directed that way in the first place because you didn't know who this was talking about at the time. That would be my analysis of that. Whereas what I'm saying is this is straightforward. He did, now we look back after Dance with Dragons, he did kill Jon Arryn. And he's, again, holding the realm together. Can't keep 100 balls in the air forever. You are more than a juggler, old friend. You are a true sorcerer. All I ask is that you work your magic a little longer. So there is your motive. Holding the realm together for now. What is Jon Arryn doing when he dies? He is trying to destroy the Baratheon alliance. He is trying to end the Lannister participation in the alliance. He is trying to go to war with the Baratheons, Arryns, and I'm sure he hopes the Starks and the Tullys to war with the Lannisters. And Stannis is trying to help him. Now, this is usually thought of as like they're investigating what the deal is with Robert's children. And I think framing it like that, is certainly one way, but it doesn't necessarily, I think the more important way to frame it is Stannis and Jon Arryn are trying to destroy the alliance with the Lannisters. The method they're going about it is they are looking for evidence that Robert's kids aren't his. I think this would take more to justify, and it doesn't really matter either way. It could be that things are dawning on them now. I think it's more likely like they've always kind of known, but now they're starting to they've always kind of suspected there's always been something weird, but they've kept their mouths shut because Robert clearly doesn't want to hear it, or he would be saying it. And there's the alliance to think about. But the political situation is changing, and they're looking now at ways to talk about this. That's what they're really doing. Are they really looking for, gosh, are Robert's children really his? Or are they looking for evidence, politically salient evidence to show to Robert and the realm that makes it possible to claim publicly that his children aren't his, to end the alliance and to remove Robert's 3 children from the succession? Either way, it doesn't matter. I think you have to either way, like whether this is something new that's dawning on them because of this investigation for some reason, or again, this thing that they're saying out loud to each other, Jon and Stannis, like for the first time after years, like, and it has to be involved in them discussing the need to end the alliance, because that's what they're doing. That is the effect. And that is a major political shift. And it means there are reasons for that outside of this fact. Otherwise it would have happened sooner. That would be my analysis. Now, it doesn't really matter, but accept the point that even if it is completely motivated by this, they're totally happy with the Lannister alliance. They have no idea anything else is coming that would make them rethink it. This is all stuff I'll be talking about much later in the Battle of Wind theory. they still know what they're doing is blowing up the alliance. And Varys knows this too. And he can't have that. So while it seems like the death of Jon Arryn is a blow to this alliance, that's the nature uh of the position Varys is in. He's having to react. He has to stop this from happening. And to do that, he has to kill Jon Arryn. And maybe he attempted to kill Stannis as well. Maybe not. Maybe he had that as a contingency, but also gave Stannis the opportunity to flee, just in case, because he wants to keep him around for later. Who knows? Maybe he did also try to kill Stannis and he failed. And Stannis books it, understanding what happened. And Stannis thinks it's the Lannisters. And that is key to what Lysa says to Littlefinger just before her death. She says, I put the tears in Robert's wine. I did what you said. And I wrote to Kat and told her that the Lannisters killed Jon. Just like you said, you're so clever. And that on the surface might be the hardest thing to square with. Well, if Varys is trying to hold the realm together, why is he then accusing? Is he introducing this accusation in of the Lannisters? And I think the fact that Stannis thinks that that's what happened is key here, because, and of course, that's what Ned comes to think, because he starts to believe this in a way that he probably would have anyway if he had ever investigated on his own for any other reason than the letter Cat got, which he might have, which he looks into he figures out what they were doing and thinks of, well, who was this threatening? It was threatening Cersei. And so that to me explains the choice. I think if you imagine that maybe to calm Lysa down, or just because, like, if you're a master schemer like this, like, you're thinking about all the angles, like, Lysa needs to accuse someone. I mean, she needs to have a story. You're not really introducing anything to the situation that isn't already there. It's already Stannis's probably immediate thought is that, oh shit, Cersei got to Jon Arryn. And like, yeah, you're trying to hold the realm together, but you have limited options here. And I think like, if there's some reason that Varys feels the need to have Lysa try and finger someone, maybe just as part of running her, as his agent, like to assuage her fears, to tell her, yeah, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. We're setting the Lannisters up to take this fall. In fact, I need you to do some proactive work in that regard and finger them to your sister Cat, who will tell her husband, and then we'll get away with it. And he names the Lannisters because there's going to be this tension anyway. There already is this tension. I mean, Jon Arryn and Stannis were already trying to blow up the alliance. Like, they're going to come to this conclusion. And eventually, he wants the alliance blown up, just not yet. That's what Varys wants. So, now back to Varys. Here we have yet another persona of the spider. There's Varys, the obsequious courtier. There's Rugen the jailer. There's a few others that maybe we don't have names for. And there's Littlefinger, sweet Peter Baelish, Lysa's pen pal. And there's probably others. But he's writing these letters, seducing her over a period, probably intending to use it later, closer to the date of Aegon's Landing, but he has to pull the trigger on getting her to kill her husband, which may not be his only goal. It could be that he's really just running this operation over a period of years to have something on Littlefinger. Um, just like he is trying to set up Littlefinger for the dagger, right? He's for fingering Tyrion with the dagger. He doesn't like Littlefinger. He doesn't trust Littlefinger. He wants Littlefinger out of the way. He's trying to preserve the alliance, but get Littlefinger the fuck out of the way because, as I said, I think in the first part, they understand how dangerous he is because they understand what Tyrion sort of discovers when he takes over the books. He says like, oh, he's he's got dragons here and dragons there, stags there. He's rubbing dragons together and making more dragons. That is, he's doing the alchemy of turning money, which everyone understands and which everyone in the Seven Kingdoms, thinks he's got his hands on, and doing the magical alchemy of turning money into something different. And that is capital. That is a large amount of money that takes on a different character when you can then take that and use it to invest and thus grow into more money in and of itself. They would understand as people from the free cities, particularly as sort of, the merchant ruling class of the free cities, as certainly Illyrio is, a merchant prince of Pentos, where this kind of capital accumulation is happening in a way that it's not really in Westeros. You know, the free cities are basically each of them different kinds of little republics run by bankers and merchants. This is a new kind of power, a serious kind of power that is growing. And maybe Littlefinger also just thinks, maybe not that he's such a risk to foiling all their plans for Targaryen restoration, but maybe he's a power they don't want to have around. Like their plan for the new regime, it is, I would guess, bringing in some of that kind of power and using it. Getting into stuff, larger issues I want to get into much later, but using it to that kind of power as a lever against the feudal power of the realm once they establish, their new dynasty. But, that's all the more reason to have this other guy who they don't really control, who's not in their pocket, like out of the way, who's building this power, who's amassing wealth and has his fingers in everything, who controls the city watch, the gold cloaks, and has his fingers in probably lots more they know, and using all this money that he's turning into capital and using that way. That's dangerous. So they want to get rid of him. So this might be an operation he's running for like long term, just to have these love notes on Littlefinger in a way that he can get rid of him as he needs to. Then he decides to use that operation as how he's going to get rid of Jon Arryn. And then, I think he then spends the rest of the book trying to get Ned to arrest and execute Littlefinger for the murder of Jon Arryn. So, you might ask, well, like, doesn't Varys have the power to just get him knocked off somehow? Well, sure, but that's not the nature of Varys's position here. He is in a very delicate position, and he has to work within certain rules. He needs other people to do his killing for him, right? Most of the time, if possible. Even the Lysa operation is somewhat dangerous, though he's insulated because, in a big way, because if anyone tracks it back to Lysa, well, all she knows is, well, Littlefinger did it, which is a perfect way to set him up, but it's also a perfect way to have, him and the Aegon cause and whatever else separated from it. He tells Ned when he's talking about, who could have killed Jon Arryn. He says, well, someone they knew and loved, meaning the Arryns, some dear sweet friend who often shared meat and mead with him, who could come and go in his kitchen without a breath of suspicion. Oh, but which one? There were many such. Lord Arryn was a kindly, trusting man. So Varys is trying to point him towards someone who has some kind of personal relationship with Jon Arryn. And Ned lands on one of the possibilities, which is Sir Hugh. And hey, maybe it was, you know, but but ultimately, like we know, like, well, if Lysa did it, was Hugh involved? Did he procure the poison or something? Like, why does it need to be him? Was he the deliverer of any messages or something? Well, more likely now, like looking back, like Hugh had nothing to do with it. Was Sandor correct about his death being deliberate? You know, in the tourney. If it was, these things are very complicated. Like, it could be that Cersei comes to believe that Sir Hugh had something to do with it as a and was helping, to help her, or maybe she had asked him, maybe she had started um enlisting him in a plot to get rid of John Arryn. There's all kinds of ins and outs it could be, and so she gets him out of the way, even though ultimately it wasn't him. But Varys is trying to get Ned to find that, find out um that it was Littlefinger. Find the, whatever. I don't know. That's what I think. And then in the next book, in Clash of Kings, he's trying to get Tyrion to arrest Littlefinger for the dagger and for everything. And Tyrion spends that book, slowly trying to, or at least the first part of the book, slowly trying to degrade Littlefinger's network, his power in King's Landing. Yes, I mean, that's the basic contours of it. I think secret letters are a perfect way to manipulate someone in secret without them divulging even to the person they think they're uh, writing to. And I think that makes more sense. And thus, it is it's a big shock to Littlefinger to hear that Lysa killed John Arryn. And either way, she's talking about it and implicating him, and so she needs to die. I don't think, I don't think he necessarily planned for her to die. Could be debated, but it seems like he's reacting in that moment, and that's Littlefinger. He's an improviser. He makes this stuff up. So now let's dive back into some things here, like the death of Joffrey and Littlefinger's involvement. This is interesting to talk more about. I think it's Sansa 5, The Storm of Swords. When Sansa says, "You killed him," referring to Dantos being shot with bolts into the chest. He says, "He sold you for the promise of 10,000 dragons. Your disappearance will make them suspect you in Joffrey's death." And this is no original thinking of mine. Indeed, if you were reading really closely, this kind of isn't that big a mystery, even on a first read. It's something like if you were maybe not the way it's meant to be read, which is just to like go along with the characters and feel their motivations and understandings as very like real and legitimate as you're experiencing them with them. But like this is, it's pretty clear that Joffrey was not the target of that assassination. You can get that from like that's kind of harped on in the ensuing chapters that like was it the wine or the pie? There's the whole Kingsguard discussion that Jaime has, and I believe Tyrion's thinking about it. If you were to, but then there's people pronouncing things that you go with, and that's and this is one of them. And here is an example of, you know, uh, Littlefinger improvising. I think I talked about his improvising in the first episode of the podcast as well, where like I think he's put in a bind by Varys, who is sort of acting like he's helping him out because of this genuine situation where like somebody has attempted to kill a lordling with a dagger that recently belonged to Littlefinger, um, and but more recently belonged to the most powerful person in the realm. And Littlefinger goes with it. He improvises masterfully in the meeting with Cat and lies beautifully. Well, Sansa is convinced, right, that Littlefinger meant to kill Joffrey for her, to free her from Joffrey, um, because he can, and because he's an agent of chaos or whatever. Keep your enemies guessing, something along those lines. He tells her, I think, at some point, maybe on the voyage, maybe once they reach the fingers. But he's pumping her for information here. He's heard the bells ringing in a way that he recognizes signifies the death of a king. So he says they will your disappearance will make them suspect you in Joffrey's death. If he's wrong, if something strange has happened and it's like Joffrey's not dead and yet they're ringing the bells that way, she will say Joffrey's death. What? And he'll go, well, I heard the bells. But if he's right, then he is taking credit for this, even though it's not what he intended, because he is seducing Sansa in more ways than one, but certainly he is bringing her into his secret world of lies and intrigue into the Game of Thrones and seducing her in a way. She says in early in her first chapter, Sansa 1, in A Feast for Crows, I think he says he's so bold, when talking about like his lies and how they're going to spin the death of Lysa, and he's talking to her about like the nature of lying, and so he's improvising here when in fact he was intending to kill Tyrion for the dual reasons that Tyrion is the person who he accused of owning the dagger, who he lied, which is, I believe, what Varys set him up in, is trying to frame a Lannister for this murder. He presses her immediately about Joffrey so that she can confirm this for him. She goes with that. He then, as he led her below, he says he's still pumping her for information so he can seem like he's in control. He says, "Tell me of the feast. The queen took such pains. The singers, the jugglers, the dancing bear. Did your little lord husband enjoy my jousting dwarfs? Yours?" And then he goes on to claim anyway that he had to take Joffrey aside and explain to him that haha, this will really piss off your uncle who you hate. In this way, he is bringing up Tyrion so that she will go, oh, and Tyrion's dead too. So he's trying to find out, did his plan work? Okay, Joffrey's dead somehow, but is Tyrion also dead? And she tells him they think Tyrion poisoned Joffrey. Sir Dantos said they seized him, and Littlefinger smiled. Widowhood will become you, Sansa. So he's thinking, well, shit, I botched this somehow. Tyrion's not dead yet. Joffrey is. Okay. I'll spin this into something I did deliberately to impress Sansa in this, because what else am I going to do? And hey, it'll work out in the end because, well, if Cersei thinks Tyrion killed Joffrey, then it's over for him, and that problem is solved. The other reason I didn't say for wanting to kill Joffrey, obviously, is because Sansa's married to him, and he has whatever plans he has for Sansa that involves her not being married to Tyrion. He then improvises later the story of Olenna Tyrell and the hairnet. I mean, this is something you could go into a lot more. Other people have. I think maybe the only thing close to a semi-original insight I would have there is that I also agree with a lot of people have said it doesn't make sense. Why would Olenna Tyrell involve herself so directly? But I almost think the hairnet could be just a device for involving Sansa in it, right? Maybe the poison was never in the hairnet. Now, of course, I think maybe she does look at it after as she's fleeing and sees there's some stones missing. So maybe it was a delivery device. Maybe it was about getting it into the room past the security of the kitchens. I think you run into like this fantasy problem here of like there exist in this world extremely effective, extremely fast acting poisons that require extremely small doses. It's like how would you ever maintain security like that at at a feast, no less? Like it's so easy to poison someone. So is that what the author's thinking? Like, okay, they must have this crazy like shakedown of all the wait staff and the kitchen staff. Like, I don't know. I think I don't love that. So almost think it's just part of involving Sansa in it. That the point is, he gives her this thing that it can seem when it was really just the waiter who gave Tyrion his pie, uh, poisoned the pie. He gives her this thing that makes her feel like she was a part of it, which is part of seducing her into her. It's involving him in the murder, he's involving her in the murder. She is guilty. She's not just like a prisoner of the guy who killed the king or what would have been her husband, but was a part of it. And she, of course, she feels in some way, in both cases, maybe would have more so with Joffrey, like already conflicted about like, and maybe with Joffrey not conflicted at all about like kind of being glad. Um, but she might have been more conflicted with Tyrion. Does Littlefinger know that? I don't know, but this is a way for her to feel like she already, before he started seducing her into this world of his intrigue, of feeling a part of it, you know? That's what I think about, the nature of Littlefinger as like an improviser who goes with the flow, who's seducing Sansa, who intended to kill Tyrion, ended up killing Joffrey, but in the moment is able to, get the information out and just go with what he needs to go with. And I think he does that when he hears this, and I just think that's a really interesting story about like and like that this is the reason why he's been lying all this time. I mean, the reason for the author why he's been lying about his history with Cat all this time, right? It's that it's yes, he's a liar, and we find that out, but also it's that like there is a mismatched information in the relationship between him and Lysa. Like she has very different ideas about their relationship than he does. And this comes out in the way it does, and he has to react. And it's not just that, you know, that it was her all those years ago, but also that he doesn't understand. He's known he's been in love with her this whole time, and that was why he again also improvised this plan. Maybe as soon as John Aaron dies, he starts thinking about his future plans as things are moving more quickly and thinks, well, okay. He over that period devises this plan, which again I'll get into in part 4, but the first part of it is, well, Lysa, like he says in the small council meeting that he proposes this, Lysa's always been in love with him. So I could go there and try and marry her. And that would do what it's going to do, which again, I'll get into in part 4 of the series. Um, Now this brings up a question that comes up in a lot of things. And it's, well, okay, I'm saying, because of course, like Littlefinger bragging about his relationship with Cat goes back to the first book, goes back to A Game of Thrones. And I'm saying here that that is why. Um, but of course, you might ask, well, like, was this always the plan? Or was this a big twist that Martin invented when writing A Storm of Swords? And that's, of course, a natural thing to ask. Um, my prejudice of a lot of this is that a lot of this is very planned. And I think, some people I think can tend to see that as kind of naive. There's this idea, I think there's for various reasons that someday maybe I might talk about on a podcast. There's, it's some readers and analysts tend to think like he's making a lot of this up as he goes along. There's the idea that his metaphor of the spectrum of process that he talks about, the difference between the gardener and the architect. Again, it's a topic for another day, but I think that's overblown in its explanatory power. I do think that most of these turns are very planned, not all of them. But this one, I would bet, has always been the plan. But that has been recently called into question earlier, well, I guess last year, um, when the Redditor GSteff U/GSTEFF did a bunch more research at the Cushing Library, where some of Martin's materials are kept, and went through some of the very late drafts of A Game of Thrones and found that they are largely very much the same, but have some small changes. And one um, really bore for GSteff on this issue exactly, and also caused a lot of other people to call into question, uh, whether this was always the plan. In particular, it's in when Bran is overhearing the conversation between Cersei and Jaime before Jaime shoves him out the window. They're discussing their Cersei's worry that a crime they've committed will be found out. Now, you are meant to read in the published version. You're not necessarily picking up right away, even by the end of the chapter, that it's Jaime she's talking to. And so the idea of the incestual relationship, the heritage of Robert's supposed children, is something that only really develops later. And so the chapter is ambiguous. In fact, in the published version, they are talking about the incest being discovered, that John Arryn knew, that Cersei's worry that Lysa Arryn therefore could know, and she has fled to the Vale already, and Jaime's trying to brush this off. But when you're reading it for the first time, it seems like they're talking about John Arryn, things he knew, what Lysa Arryn could know, and it seems like they're talking about having murdered John Arryn. And that's what you're getting. Cersei, as you figure out, oh, this is the queen, Bran knows or she's talking about, he doesn't even know who it is, I think, but she's talking about the king not loving her. And so you go, okay, this is the queen. She's having some adulterous relationship with somebody. Maybe if you're really sharp, you're picking up that the golden man is Jaime. But on a first read, as written, you probably aren't. So you're hearing this and thinking, oh, they're talking about having killed John Arryn. Now, and then later, you're finding out about the incest. And so on a second read, you're going back and going, wait a minute. Oh, wait, they're talking about being found out about the incest. So wait a minute, who killed John Arryn? But as you're reading it, that's not like, that's not what you're necessarily thinking. So GStiff finds this line in here that is excised from the final version, but that appears in very late drafts, the last few drafts. And it's when she's talking about Lysa Arryn, she thinks, do you think she will do any less for her child, than I did for mine? And so she's saying she did something, past tense. She has committed some act to protect her children. And thus that I think is correct, that GSteff identifies this as important, and that it does seem to pose the question, well, wait, does that mean that in this draft, Cersei here is saying, I had Robert Arryn killed, and thus in that draft, these very late drafts, it was actually Cersei and Jaime who did it. And that's really interesting in itself, of course, but also because so little else in those drafts have been changed. They're very much the same, including a lot of what, after A Storm of Swords, the theorists identified as foreshadowing of Lysa's guilt. in particular, there's a lot of discussion, and I believe it even comes up in this conversation between uh, Jamie and Cersei that Bran is overhearing. There's a lot of discussion of the possible warding of little Sweet Robin, little Robert Arryn. And Lysa, this is what Lysa, when she's confessing to John Arryn's murder, she indicates was one of her motivations, in addition to being with Littlefinger, one of her motivations for getting rid of John is that he wanted to send Robert Arryn off to be warded somewhere. I didn't look it all up for this, and it's actually quite confusing. The characters themselves are confused about who wanted to ward him where and who objected throughout the series. Um, but it doesn't really matter. The point is, like, all of this did seem to be, along with some other things, foreshadowing that, oh yeah, it was always like Lysa Arryn. Because otherwise, you could ask the question, well, like, did George pull this out of his ass in A Storm of Swords? Fair enough. I mean, now again, like, my prejudice is that a lot of this is planned. But in this case in particular, it is interesting that that would call into question a lot of stuff that is in the book, that is in these same drafts, where it seems to be indicated like maybe Cersei is literally saying, I did this murder. And yet all this other stuff is exactly the same. And that changes how you think about that. Now, I actually think it changes a lot more. If this was the case, right just before the publication of A Game of Thrones, that it was not that it was Cersei and Jaime who did the murder. And there's intended to be this chapter in which you hear them confess to it, essentially. That really changes for me the entire ambition of A Game of Thrones and the series. And it's not like that's impossible. That is a kind of story you can tell, this kind of dramatic irony of uh, Ned trying to figure all this out and doing this investigation while the whole time we know and are correct that it was the Lannisters because we heard them say it very clearly, actually, like, I did this. Would she do any less for hers than I did for mine? The context being what we're talking about, which seems to be, as you're reading it, the murder of John Arryn. And if that was the choice, if that was like, that's a very different story, actually. Where the that's Columbo, right? That's like where you see the murder, and then what's fun is Columbo, figuring it out in the first 30 seconds and spending the next hour and a half of the, you know, uh, NBC Monday Night Movie in a battle of wits, trying to figure out exactly how, but really mostly wearing down the stamina of the wealthy murderer uh, so that they confess. Um, it's not strictly a mystery, is it? And I see, it's more than I'm going to get into here, but like, I see this story, the ambition here being very different from that. I see this being about this whole series, the ambition, what he's trying to do, what he wants to do, being about perspective, being essentially postmodern in that regard, that, going beyond really a quote unquote unreliable narrator, which it is in a technical sense, a series of unreliable narrators, but actually trying to take that as far as you possibly can, where these characters just don't know what's going on at any time. And having the killers of one of the early mysteries just say it, and having that be the truth, is a kind of story you can tell. That is a kind of book he could have been writing, but like, I think it's so vastly different from what we get that I'm really skeptical. I also think then, proceeding from there, um, but like I say, a lot of people did see this and really think about it and think, yeah, okay, this means this was a last minute change, and all of the foreshadowing that seems to be is actually he just worked in later when he came to do it. a last minute change, maybe not even to Lysa Arryn, though she does come up even in those drafts that they are talking about her, which, you know, I think is, again, indication. There's, like I said, there is lots of foreshadowing, including that they're talking about her in the chapter. And it turns out to be her in the end. But ultimately, I think, if I was to try and convince you that no, this was not, this was all, even then, like there may have been a time much earlier in the process when he was thinking of the Lannisters having done it. Like, sure, that's very possible. I would bet that didn't include them being overheard talking about it. Um, and lots of things could have been possible ideas in the evolution of the story. I would say that the key thing to remember for me is that the point of the chapter, the point of Bran overhearing this conversation, is you're supposed to come away with it thinking they are talking about the murder of Jon Arryn. So a lot of what they are saying is meant to, on a first read, have you convinced that, have you thinking that, and then once you figure out it's Cersei in the chapter, and Cersei and whoever, maybe later you piece it together that it was this Jaime, or you do later piece it together. But so you're thinking that they've been talking about killing Jon Arryn. But then if you're really thinking about it, you think back, or at least on a second read, and you go, oh, they're just worried about the incest being found out. But the point is, you're always supposed to think they are talking about Jon Arryn. So while, yes, in the context, when she says that I did for mine, yes, it does seem to point to she's more concretely saying that I can come up with any number of things to say, like what she would have actually meant by that statement. Like what she did for hers, like staying with Robert, like dealing with being married to him to protect her children. Okay. But that's not really the point, right? Like you can come up with all kinds of things, but it does seem to be indicated there. But again, it's in a chapter that is supposed to lead you to that direction. Everything they're saying is supposed to lead you there. So for me, it makes perfect sense that this is ultimately corrected out of the final draft, because even though the author wrote it thinking like, well, what she's actually talking about is like the struggle of her life, of like staying with Robert and like going through this for her children to save, to protect their life and, seat one of them on the throne. He ultimately thinks, but it goes a little beyond that ambiguity and feels too much like her saying. The rest on a first read really feels like there's talking about killing Jon Arryn. But, and this is right in there with that, but on his final analysis, he's saying like, he's thinking, well, this maybe goes a little too far. The rest of the more ambiguous language I use is more what's called for here, because you're still coming away thinking they're talking about killing Jon Arryn. I don't need this more heavy-handed thing, even if I can explain it and it makes sense that, um, and that makes more sense to me than like all of this being different. And it can even have been, even if you wanted to say like, I don't think this is the case, but even if you wanted to say like, no, that line was written when um they were the killers. And I don't think that makes sense. I don't think you'd have this conversation overheard in that way. But again, these are drafts. Like it's changed at the last minute. He could have changed a lot of other things and missed that and missed the implications of that, which is a hard thing to think through. Every line in a book you're going through, every line in a chapter, like what does it mean? When again, the point of the conversation is to make the reader think they killed Jon Arryn. So like, yeah, that sentence makes you think they killed Jon Arryn along with a bunch of others, differentiating that extreme subtlety there. When you've already written it months earlier, maybe a year, maybe years earlier. Again, I don't think that's the scenario, but it's just very easy for me to imagine that that's not, that this doesn't really change anything in that regard. So I think this was always the plan. I think Liza always did it. I think it was always Varys who put her up to it. Anyway, I actually wrote about this in a Reddit post in our ASOIAF. You know what that stands for. My handle on Reddit is really embarrassing. It's Moon M Man for all I know. Moon Man for all I know. Because I spelled it wrong. I just fat finger typoed it and you can't change it. And I'd already been posting before I even realized or something. Embarrassing. But it has my little googly eyed face. The post is called G Steph's research on Game of Thrones drafts, Who Killed John Aaron. And I talk about my analysis of this question, and I dropped my theory of who actually killed John Aaron in it, and it's a little more meticulously laid out, though briefer. So better in all ways than what you've just listened to, and it's a kind of a little joke I'm having where I tell you about it now. So thanks for listening, and my God, thank you so much for subscribing. You are saving my life. Okay, I'll see you in part 3 of the Battle of Wind. Thank you so much, everyone. This is Greg, aka Moon Man. It's Moon Messages, episode 3.1, bonus Patreon only discussion in this journal of my random theories. And this one is going to be talking about stuff we've already talked about, and also addressing some great comments, some people catching me in my mistakes, some added material especially on episode 3, Who Killed John Aaron, of which, you are now all totally convinced. You totally believe my theory now. But in case we need to talk about it anymore, we always do. That's what I'm here for. But I think there's some stuff on the previous episodes as well. I can't imagine I need to tell anybody listening to this about this, but part 3 of Stannis, That Peach in the Battle of Wind is out, and can't thank you enough for watching. And to all of you who watched that and the whole series and decided to support the project, it means an enormous amount to me. It's not something I'm really thrilled to be doing, making like a sob story pitch for cash in that way. And I'll tell you, miraculously, on the day that the day before I posted the video, I actually would have posted it on the Friday, but it wasn't until the Saturday, because I actually had a day of work that Friday for the first time in 2 months. I was very busy over the next week since posting it. That's why this has taken a while to get out. I had a week of work basically for the first time in 2 months, and which is what it's been like for the last 2 years. Way too slow. But you are all helping me stay afloat. Literally and figuratively, I live on a boat. So sent a nice email to the marina this morning explaining exactly how much I will have for them and when. So that's always good. But anyway, thank you. Seriously, thank you so much. I want to keep doing this. I've got so much on that theory, so much more I want to do. I want to have these conversations. On that subject, at 9 a.m. Saturday, the Interesting Nerd Club tells me that the episode of their recurring theory game series, which is excellent, will be dropping, and I am their guest this week. Tom pitched Zach and I a very interesting theory, and I was pretty useless at the game, but we did talk about a lot of stuff. If you've seen that channel, you know what I mean. But I would check it out because I think I say this on their episode, but I really like. I actually have listened to a lot of back episodes of that, because they're doing I think if my project, right, like what I'm interested in doing here is like getting inside the mind of God, figuring out what the author is really thinking and trying to lay down in the text here. I think the path to that is having a very open mind about a lot of things, and they certainly do, and are willing to engage in,
any course of thought, basically, about with the acknowledgement that like anything and everything might be happening in these books. And I think that's the right attitude, and it makes for really interesting theory discussions about the text. And like, I love it. And it's a good episode, so check that out. I like I said, I like their approach, and it's like it's never about, well, what's the simplest explanation? What's the Occam's razor? What's the thing that we know is confirmed? What's the thing that is the most likely explanation? Which, that's fine if you're interested in thinking about these books deeply, which is a weird thing in itself. And not really the main intention of the books, though I think it is an intention. That's certainly one way to think about them. And or maybe it's just the kind of thing you you end up doing when you're tired of getting yelled at in like comment threads for having weird ideas. I don't know. I think concepts like Occam's razor are useful logical constructs for like, I don't know, teaching children about how to think about things, and maybe even in their principle. In the case of that one, like always being able to stand back and assess what the simplest explanation for something is. That's a great grounding exercise, or if not an exercise, just a normal way of thinking about something clearly, is to know that. I don't think, that doesn't really mean it's like the most profound lens to look at everything in the world, and the last thing in the world that it's really super meaningful or determinative for would be assessing a crazy mystery story, in fiction. This is fiction we're talking about here. So I like that. I like that spirit of just like finding anything to pick at and try and weave it into a story you can tell about it, because that's what this is. It's a story by an incredibly inventive and weird man who is having fun with us by hiding a lot of stuff and only revealing directly the perceptions of a small handful of characters. And so the rest of how the world actually works, both in whether it's magic or politics, political economy you're talking about, that's how I look at it. We're only getting this small slice. The rest, if you want to figure it out, if you want to be correct, you're going to have to guess. And, telling a story that is convincing as potentially being what's in the author's head, I think is what's, probably going to actually result in the right guesses. So anyway, check that out. Hopefully I'll get this out before then, but I'll link to it in here when it drops, and I'll post it on YouTube and such. Anyway, so who killed John Aaron? Well, don't I feel foolish? Of course, this that I'm doing here is different from my videos. Oh, if you're like new and you're catching to the Patreon, but you're catching this first and you haven't gone back and listened, at least at this point, like this podcast thing is pretty new. I would start at the beginning. This is going to be rehashing stuff that's already been talked about from new angles that I didn't talk about it before. And so like it kind of serves as like a running journal is how I'm thinking about it. So first we'll talk about episode 3, Who Killed John Aaron. And the biggest mistake I made, again, in this, what I was saying is it's different from the Battle of Wind videos, because those are very scripted and very thought out. And this, I'm trying to do a quicker form of content that is more extemporaneous, and so it's real easy, and without the massive amount of research. And so it's real easy to screw things up. So I make this whole point about Littlefinger not knowing he's been with Lysa, and that, it turns out, is wrong. The first person to find the citation, a lot of people dropped this in the comments on YouTube, that this was the case, but the first person to drop the citation was a YouTube user called Max Martins 1238, and it's from Clash of Kings, Chapter 17, Tyrion 4, Clash of Kings. My lord, you were fostered at River Run. I've heard it said you grew close to the Tullys. You might say so. This is Littlefinger. You might say so. The girls especially. How close? I had their maidenheads. Is that close enough? So that's gross. In a as I've called it before, a typically Westerosi way. But also it does imply that he of course could be lying about any of this. But what I pitch in episode 3 is of Moon Messages is that he's not lying about these things. This is what he believes, and um, I wish I had remembered that this was the case. But ultimately, it doesn't change the thinking. It changes how I would have argued it, because what this means then is that the new piece of information, the new revelation that Littlefinger is hearing for the first time and processing and assimilating, and that in a way is also a clue to us, getting us thinking about, gets me thinking about like what else is he hearing for the first time here, um, is simply that he was never with Cat. Um, and indeed, and that I think that is the bigger revelation for him, along with the other even bigger revelation for everyone, which is that Lysa killed her husband. And he's hearing this for the first time because she's spilling it for the first time, like she's spilling everything. And so that still rings exactly the same way to me. In fact, him knowing that he has been with Kat actually reinforces my thinking about how, as a baseline assumption, and a thing that I'm thinking about, thinking about when I think through, like, how did they have this conspiracy together, is like he should probably be very careful around her because they have this history. And as a baseline assumption, I want to get to what I mean by that in a minute, but this is even more so because I actually go back. I caveat that a little in the last episode, saying, "Oh, right. Well, he doesn't know that he's been intimate with Kat. I mean, with Lysa. Oh man, did I screw that up previously? You know what I mean. He doesn't. He thinks he's been with Kat. He's finding out he hasn't. But he is correct all this time that he knew. And there's other places I think he says multiple times that he's been with Lysa. He just doesn't know this one time that's very important to him, that he thinks he was with Kat, was actually Lysa. When she describes, as I talk about, she reveals that he said Kat's name. Anyway, the fact that he knows that they have a history like that is actually important, I think. The next thing that got brought up once or twice is that is the theory. Man, I wish I knew where it came from first. That young Robert Aaron, young Sweet Robin, is actually Littlefinger's son by Lysa. This comes from, well, obviously the fact that they've been together, that he did, that she did become pregnant by him at one point, which gets you thinking about, like, well, could they have actually had a son together? And then someone at some point in presumably the distant past realized that mockingbirds are apparently known for putting their eggs in other birds' nests, and even throwing out, like picking up and tossing out some of the eggs that are there to make room for them, thus causing these other birds to sit on the eggs, keep them warm until they hatch, and then feed the young mockingbird. And that is, someone picked that up, thinking about either some bird lover or someone looking through the house banners and personal sigils of characters to try and find meanings. And man, is that very interesting. Like I just completely was not thinking about this when I recorded that, but like, which would have caused me maybe to think like, oh wait, do I think they've been together, and look that up and try to find that. But I have actually always really liked this. I think that is as shaky as like just some animal behavior of a thing that happens to be used for a sigil is, you know, That's pretty good. It's pretty good. He already is associated with Lysa and her own pregnancy and fertility. He, the marriage itself of Lysa and John Aaron is highlighted as, I mean, this is the case with any marriage, but in particular because he was old and had no male heir at that point, as a real emergency measure to get him an heir. It makes a ton of sense, and then you start wondering, does John Aaron know this? And the obvious, I'm sure most people say, well, obviously, this is a secret from John Aaron, but I'm not willing to make those judgments. I don't know, maybe he couldn't get her pregnant or something, and his deal with Littlefinger was Littlefinger's, participation, silence, and that this is the reason, not just Lysa lobbying for him, but this is the reason he gets his appointments in, what is it, Gulltown, and then eventually, he's brought into John Aaron's orbit by Lysa for this purpose, basically. I think that's an interesting thought. It doesn't, it bears on this stuff a little because, I talk about an assumption of a need of Littlefinger to steer clear of Lysa, to avoid her eyes. And I don't know if maybe based on some of the comments or just I just want to maybe say in a different way, maybe not, that what I mean is that this is a thought that occurs to me in the course of thinking about how would this conspiracy be carried out. And it's if you're doing this, and the court also, he is telling people about that he has been with the Tully girls. And so that all makes me think, I at least the question comes to my mind, doesn't he need to be not under suspicion ever of this? Because either, okay, if John Aaron doesn't know or knows that something happened in the past, which is what I suspect, at least, whether that he knows that his kid isn't his or participated in it, arranged it, whatever, he knows something happened between them. Wouldn't it behoove Littlefinger to really be above any suspicion by never being seen having a little side conversation with Lysa by John Aaron or by anyone in the court or anyone in the castle, even the prying eyes of the spider? And that's almost more important in a way as a thought about how does this work, that leads me to this. Well, he would okay, and then how does he not get then how, if they can't be seen going in and out of doors together, or he can't be seen coming by their apartments in the Tower of the Hand constantly or weekly when John Aaron's not there, this, it would be, it's too much, right? And in general, you can imagine a scenario where he would be really on his, really trying to avoid her eyes, even. That's the maximal version, because even if John Aaron knows all this, you can't be, he is Littlefinger's original patron, in addition to being one of the most powerful people in the kingdom. Add that all up, he can't be seen to be mocking John Aaron even, or humiliating him, right? He has to at least perform, even if people know this, he shouldn't be seen publicly to be flaunting that. Now this is a baseline assumption that leads me to think about, well, how does this work then? And for other reasons, okay, there's this idea of the note is introduced, and it makes me think whatever else is happening, if there's these notes, then in the notes is a constant reminder to not show this friendship, this love, this conspiracy, not show it on our faces in public. Ultimately, really, it's not necessary that they actually never meet eyes in public. It's just the thought of those mechanics, like how this would work. In practice, it could be as simple as Littlefinger, or the writer of the notes, the letters, saying like, "This is how we will carry on our love here, but this is a lie." And to do a lie, by omission, this is a lie of omission. We can't tell anyone about this. And to correctly live that lie, we must live that lie at all times in public. And the only time we don't live that lie is in these letters. This is where we live our truth. But in public, at all times, or even in private, because the Red Keep, including the Tower of the Hand, has eyes at all times and ears, we live this lie. And so that doesn't mean necessarily, because this is similar to, I could have pulled up the quotes or something, but it's got to be the beginning of Feast for Crows, the first stanza 1 of Feast for Crows, right? Where he's talking to her about, and maybe as that book continues, there's more of it, but certainly in stanza 1, he's talking to her about like the nature of this lie with the Lord's declarant on their way. I think it is, will they believe us? And it's like, well, they will for their own reasons, but we have to believe, we just believe it. And and how he gets her to really assume a new identity, and the importance of that by even in closed doors, even behind closed doors. She is Elaine Stone. Now, you may be noticing like that's Littlefinger, and I'm saying this is somebody else. But I think the principle of like how to lie about this and how the author's thinking about it, and us just being clued into it and thinking about it because of the way Littlefinger's talking about it, that leads me down this road. So what it can be as simple as they're polite. Maybe Littlefinger goes to dinner once a month at the Erin's house. They have conversation, but they live the lie. Lysa is instructed, beseeched, always to live the lie, which means the only important thing, the important piece of it is that she is instructed in this manner of lying, in this this performance, that she never breaks that character, even in private. Even if she runs into Littlefinger on the stairs, she only is in the public character and never the character of the letters. She's never living her truth, which means if she's instructed to do that, then she's never going to say something to Littlefinger that he's like, what? What are you talking about? That he doesn't know about from the letters. That's the key, right? So the first thought is that leads me partially down this path is that, well, he should be like avoiding her at all costs out of propriety. But once you get the other pieces, you can reverse that as necessary, depending on the situation, to everyone's friendly, everyone's cool, but she never lets on with a wink, a smile, or certainly any content even whispered in his ear on the stair, and thus has been instructed, without really understanding it, never to reveal to Littlefinger that she is having a conversation via letter with someone claiming to be Littlefinger. That's the concept there. That's what I think about that. And this also plays into something maybe I didn't touch on it perhaps enough, is like in my concept of Varys trying to lead Ned toward Littlefinger and him getting sort of caught up in the other possibility, the plot. I think Varys is like plausible deniability suspect is Sir Hugh. He's talking to like someone familiar with the errands, someone who has access to their kitchens. And it's like, if I'm saying he's trying to get him eventually past Sir Hugh to Littlefinger, you would have to imagine that, again, you could say like Ned's not there. he knows that Littlefinger is ultimately a, that John Aaron's ultimately Littlefinger's patron, that he goes back with Lysa Tully. So he might be making, you could say he's like making something up, but let's assume that like he's trying to lead him down a correct path here. And that path, he wants it eventually actually to lead to Littlefinger. You have to guess that Littlefinger was familiar with the Aarons, that he did stop by occasionally. That's I guess how I justify that. Is that like they can be familiar. It's just not the way I would tell the story of this theory, because like the important part is thinking first, like how would this work? Like how did they carry on this thing? Other things related to that, other people brought up so here's another kind of related quibble someone brought up in the YouTube comments. And I'll just read. Maybe I'll read the exchange here, see how far we get. Littlefinger does know how to circumvent Varys. It's in the Godswood. There are no walls for his little birds to hide behind the Godswood, which is why he makes sure Sansa and Dantos meet in secret there. And I don't remember now, but luckily I said in my response that I actually didn't remember to bring this up in the extended Patreon version even, which is why I'm now repeating it to here. And what I respond then is that I say, let's see, this is on its face a plausible explanation. I still think it's not particularly believable, but could very well be the author's intention. But that's how I interpret Martin's mysteries. He leaves many plausible explanations, many motives for characters, many possibilities. The key question is whether Lysa Arryn could be trusted to keep such deadly secrets. Other people had questions also about, like, what do you mean by Lysa's reliability? I go on here. She has a breakdown and starts confessing to everyone in the room, and he is motivated to kill her for this. But she could have done this at any time. So this, he's motivated to kill her. I do talk about this, but like that same motivation, just thinking ahead, like this person could just talk at any time, such that he has to get her out of the way when it happens. But like he could have looked ahead and thought, well, that's a reason not to trust her with this. That's what leads me to ask these questions and come up with an alternate explanation, which happens to be very interesting and fun and adds more complex dimension to the character of Littlefinger, I think. And, again, not to, I'm not trying to, pick on anyone here. I mean, these are, I like having these discussions. And, so the user comes back and says, the commenter comes back and says, well, Lysa only acted this way in a final instant because she was broken beyond the point of no returns. Yeah, I mean, that totally makes sense. It totally plays in the scene. And I think that's like, this is one way that Martin is working like on another level, is that for all the crazy stuff that's going on in his head, I think all the other things that are out of, that are not immediately on the page that I think are going on, the page does make sense. These are hugely popular books. Everyone likes them. My dad's girlfriend is just like a older suburban white lady. She who reads. She read them and thought they were great. Page turners. She loved them. That's because the characters are so fantastically well written. And part of that is that we can identify with every one of their perspectives because we believe them. We believe their interpretation of events as they see them and as they try to explain them to themselves. Even if those interpretations are wrong, they're written so well. And part of that means that there are other explanations, and those are good explanations. So a lot of my theories, and this is true of a lot of very good theories, are about this series, are not necessarily going to be about solving a problem that needs solving. It might sometimes be about, but that's more about looking for those problems, like really on a much deeper read. because there are no problems on a normal reader's first read. There aren't. There are no plot holes. There are no like confusing contradictions. There may be questions. They're of interest, but like ultimately there are always things that take you along with them. Even this contradiction I bring up in part 3 of the Battle of Wind of like Mance calling himself a king. Some of the more skeptical response has been like, well, stuff I mentioned in the video, but whatever, is like, well, all the leaders of the free folk have called themselves a king. So yeah, absolutely. It's a king, but it just doesn't mean that. It's this honorary title. It doesn't go. It's like, yeah, well, I spend a lot of time saying that in the video. My point is not that it doesn't make sense or is not realistic. Any society in all of its systems and social relations, whatever it is, it is riddled with contradictions. But this is fiction, and this particular contradiction, as I kind of explain in the video, like had me thinking as I was reading it in this case. Like I was expecting that contradiction to be more highlighted than it was. And yet it wasn't. That doesn't mean that as I'm reading, I'm going, this doesn't make sense, or this is unrealistic for them to be calling him this king while they have these other ideological perspectives. Not at all. It makes complete sense. Absolutely realistic. Absolutely go with it. It just surprised me a bit because I felt like I was being set up for something else. But then I didn't think of it again. I thought, oh, that's interesting. He went a different way. It's only later when I'm thinking through all this other stuff that I'm looking around going like, okay, who else is on this same tip here? We'll start with people who are or might wear crowns, that I start working backward from there on Mance. So, this doesn't need an explanation. How did I get off on this, Jag? Yeah, she's fraying. It makes perfect sense. She is distraught over this incredible thing that everything she's done. She killed her husband. She's not only been in love with this wretched little weasel her entire life. She's not only traumatized by the loss of her son, by that love, by the unrequited nature of that love, the jealousy, or whatever other feeling she has about the fact that she's always known that he really cared for Cat. And then she kills her husband to be with him. And for him then to cheat on her in an enormously hurtful way as well. It wrecks her, it sends her off the deep end. And yeah, that makes perfect sense. The author absolutely could have written it with that in mind, that Littlefinger did carry on this affair. He did contrive this conspiracy with her, and felt it was worth it. And it makes sense to him. Then they met in the Godswood. And then she just couldn't take it anymore. I just call bullshit. I just don't think that. I think there are these clues that I've identified, these things that, like, if you think it through, like, that sounds really hard to pull off in the Red Keep. Even just them, like, meeting occasionally or passing notes. And then for a murder conspiracy, period. But then not between him and some shrewd lord or some cold, hard killer like Lysa Arryn. I mean, I think that says to me, you think back on like everything about Lysa Arryn you've learned especially since Cat and Tyrion first arrive at the Eyrie. And you picture that and go like, how does Littlefinger make that call? I think it's a crazy risk. Again, I could be wrong. This is fiction. He could be thinking about it differently. And there may be even other details to that thinking that I'm not thinking about. But the second I started thinking about it, I came up with something else. So that seems even better to me. And so that's how I get there. Again, just to keep going here, the commenter says, it doesn't necessarily mean she was beyond, she was fraying sense of self. She's really lost it in this moment. That doesn't necessarily mean that she was always incapable of keeping her mouth shut at every point in the past. Absolutely. And points out she did keep her cool up to that point. Absolutely. I just think it's the risk that, like, I can't square. And that's another part of the methodology here is like, look, ultimately this is fiction. And I'm not even saying that, like, well, if it turns out, this was Littlefinger, then it's a plot hole that that's not how I think about things. It's just a clue. It's okay for, first of all, there may be, like I said, other thinking in the author's mind that makes this make more sense. But I just see it as a clue. I see the idea, like everything about carrying, like trying to have a secret in the Red Keep, and everything we know about Lysa Arryn, that is the solution to this murder mystery. That Littlefinger did that? That just screams like clues to me. That doesn't mean it's a plot hole or anything. But part of the methodology for me, for better or worse, is thinking, from the very second I started reading these books, thinking like, this is very, very good. It's very well written, but it's also the motivations of these characters feel extremely real, feel extremely thought out, and it's something maybe more relevant to other stuff I've talked about. The politics feels strangely real. I don't know, how to say that in a way that doesn't seem trite. It is weird. Like I like a good political drama in some kind of sci-fi or fantasy. It's the space politics that always my favorite part of Star Trek. Okay, and look, I think Deep Space Nine is one of the greatest television shows ever made, and it's great, and I love the space politics. And sometimes it even manages to be really kind of thoughtful and interesting and get at some nugget that's real and have fun with it. But at no point does it actually ever feel actually real. I keep saying real. That doesn't feel like quite the right word. But that's really hard to do. I mean, and then you add to that and we're talking still about, really, when you say the politics seem real, what you're talking about is the character's motivations in a political context. But that's what is often, the systems, the institutions, the constructs of politics, and then how people act in them, especially, is usually kind of fake. It's usually simplified in any fiction. And George's method this is all very subjective too, because like no one agrees on how the motions of history, describing and interpreting those, are contestable and contested. And so, it's also maybe a silly, like kind of a fool's errand to say, well, like, I think the politics are really real, and so therefore anything I think would be the real politics is what must be what's happening. There's a sort of absurdity to that, because even interpretations of, like I say, the motions of history, of how politics works, let's say, is contestable. Nobody agrees on that shit. And yet, that is what I'm doing. That is the method here. I don't try to justify it that way in the videos. I'm telling you guys. Because that's just the vibe I got. The very strange, like, feeling I got reading the first book, going like, all of this really checks out to me. And then it's when you think about it closely that I find, like, oh wait, here's like a detail. Here's a crevice that if you look in it, something weirdly finally seems off. Seems more like fiction than like real people acting in the world. And then, think about it for a few minutes more and go, oh, but it could be this, Now, like I say, that's a potentially ludicrous proposition, which is why I don't like talk about it that way in the videos, I just try to present a a story, an argument, and if you find it convincing, you find it convincing. If you don't, you don't. Anyway, God, I am a rambler. I hope this is making sense. I'm having fun. This is fun for me talking about this. This is what I want to do. I want to talk about this stuff, and it's nice having you guys, the whatever small number of you there are right now, to talk about stuff in this more kind of detailed way. Talk about like methodologies. This is fun. Like I am endlessly fascinated by these books, man. Like that's part of the experience that I had that led me to this path is reading this and going like, I've never really had this feeling to this degree where someone is, it's hard enough to, it's been said that it's often a mistake to imagine the artist as intellectual. Usually they're not, and it's usually very hard for anyone, certainly a good artist, to really grasp even any, from any point of view, any analysis of, I don't know, like I say, the motions of history. That's hard, and then to be able to replicate those in fiction, in a totally fictitious context, in a way that resonates, that feels real to every reader. That's weird, man. That's kind of mind-blowing. That's one of the most sort of mind-blowing things about reading this for me. I think everyone experiences that on some level of like these characters and what they do. I'm totally engrossed and identify here because you're never thinking, oh, well, that's dumb, when you're reading it at first, like so much fiction, is like that. That's the hardest thing is the motivations, the characters. Okay. I probably said everything I wanted to say 3 times about that, so we'll keep going here. Well, anyway, I just think it's an unlikely risk such that that's what clued me in to thinking about it this way. One of the things. And ultimately, I think it's guessing about these things that are going to end up in the right answer. You know what I mean? Like, if there are right answers to be had and someone's going to, like, arrive at those right answers, like, because this is fiction, it's some guesses that are going to end up there. Some good guesses. Yeah, and this was about the Godswood originally too. And I guess I probably touched on that a little, but yeah, it's like that. So that's along a similar vein. Yes, that is presented absolutely. Already, it's been presented in A Storm of Swords as a way to do this, and it's totally plausible as a thing that could be what the author's thinking and trying to communicate here. I mean, I think he's definitely trying to communicate it. It's definitely what you're supposed to think, and it's totally plausible that that's the right answer in the author's mind. I don't think it's plausible in reality, which is the barometer I'm using here. Again, not even in the sense that I think if it is that, it's a plot hole, because like I'm just using this extremely like high bar as a way to imagine getting inside the author's head, if that makes sense, and using that as inspiration to find stories that make more or better sense than the initial impression. I don't even know if I said anything just then, but you listened. So here we are. Okay, here's the thing I wanted to bring up is that something I maybe didn't mention is that I talk quite a bit about Littlefinger taking credit for Joffrey's death, but not Jon Arryn's with Sansa. One just like side note that I meant to mention that I thought of is that one dimension. I think it's mostly about. I think he's seducing Sansa in many ways, and he's bringing her into his orbit. He's involving her in the murder of Joffrey, like he would have involved her in the murder of Tyrion if it had gone down as he planned. But also, there's just this other interesting dimension that I don't know if it leads anywhere, but that occurs to me is just that if Sansa is ever discovered with Littlefinger, it will be immediately assumed that he is involved in Joffrey's death, by Cersei, by lots of people. So telling her that isn't really, doesn't really add anything to the equation, of like his discoverability. If that seal is broken, then he's already connected to it. If anyone finds Sansa and thus is able to ask her, "Hey, who killed Joffrey?" He's already suspected and therefore, probably dead. So whereas with Jon Arryn, even if he did kill him, that is a much tighter circle, especially now that Lysa is dead. Because him being connected to Lysa is something everybody already knows. No one has any reason to suspect him except for Lysa's testimony. Whereas, like, yeah, just the fact of Sansa turning up at the Eyrie is going to point a big, big, big finger at Littlefinger. Okay. Again, not to pick on anyone. And certainly I hope no one ever does. I doing this because I want to have these conversations, and like everyone, the nature and I think a lot of the point is that everyone's going to have all these different interpretations of this stuff, and I love getting these comments. Where people push back on this, and I like to answer, and I answer them in the comments. I don't know if you've noticed, but I do respond to the comments, and if it's something like someone with some substance, I respond in substance usually. So this is one such. This is actually, because I already mentioned them, for very helpfully finding the passage where Littlefinger claims he's been with Lysa. Gives an appraisal here. Try to imagine George having written one of the most celebrated chapters in the whole series, quote, "only cat," unquote, delivering a very satisfying reveal to the first big mystery, to one of the first big mysteries in the story. Baelish told Lysa to kill Jon Arryn, only to somehow reveal over a decade later that it was actually Varys or Cersei forging letters. So this is a YouTube watcher. So, I probably just should have said it was Varys at the end of the YouTube version, the short version. Varys or Cersei forging letters from Baelish to Lysa in order to manipulate her. Why? I appreciate your attempts to think outside the box, and I'm rooting for you to find persuasive new theories, but this makes no sense to me. And fair enough. I'll read part of my response here. Appreciate your support, et cetera, et cetera. I guess I would say that's part of how I see the story on a fundamental level. We all understand that the series is about political intrigue, deception, scheming, lies, etc. I think it goes beyond that to being an exploration of the farthest limits of the unreliable narrator. The ambition is to construct a narrative in which the characters, their motivations, their interpretation of events, and their choices ring masterfully true on a first and even many subsequent reads when the books don't come out for decades. Yet, we really have such a limited view on the story that there can exist simultaneously another parallel story that is actually the truth. This is what I was just talking about. To put it another way, the Lysa confession is a fantastic reveal. It is, and it always will be, on a first read of the series. It's shocking and rings true and makes sense. What I'm saying is it may even be more interesting if it's only half true. Lysa killing her own husband is really by far the biggest part of the twist. Littlefinger having been involved is not a twist at all. Littlefinger would always have been a secondary suspect if you were thinking outside the box even a little. Indeed, I bet plenty of people were wondering if Littlefinger was involved even as an agent of the Lannisters, and even just as an agent of the Lannisters and an associate of Jon Arryn. It's him who executes the coup against Ned on their behalf, after all. That makes sense? Like, it's not a huge reveal that Littlefinger was involved. It's kind of one of the people you thought was doing it. It's only like a little bit of a reversal if you're thinking, if some point during A Storm of Swords you've realized, oh, that was Varys who was being talked to, and someone said, hey, you killed one hand. It's like, you're not even, Littlefinger's always on the radar for this. By the time we get through Storm of Swords, Littlefinger has left to take Jon Arryn's place as Lysa's husband and then killed the king. Now, on the kind of first read, we should always understand that any novel is really written for. Perhaps one is not at this point taking the time to wonder if Littlefinger might have actually killed Jon Arryn, but I bet a small number of observers were. In any case, it's more of a confirmation of Littlefinger's ambitions, ruthless nature than the major twist of Lysa's personal confession. Like, that's a big twist. Littlefinger being involved is kind of like, oh, okay, it was Littlefinger. Lysa killed her husband. That's a great reveal. It is. It's fantastic. But as we don't have access to Littlefinger's inner monologue, we don't really know what he knows. This is also fundamental to how I read it. I think it's really wild and interesting if only half the twist is true and Littlefinger is caught off guard. Then maybe I get pedantic here, but it's just for you guys to talk about my thinking and methodology. The last thing I say is you bring up time frame. For me, and this is a minor quibble, the decade-plus lag between books is not really useful for thinking about the author's intentions. Martin knew what he was doing when he wrote A Storm of Swords. Whatever that was, he might change his mind and rework ideas as he writes them into prose, but the fact that it's taking him a long time is not in itself likely to affect how the story plays out. The causality would flow in the other direction, right? Because how he's writing the story is at least one factor in how long it's taking him to write it. It's not like I don't think, even in the case of even in the case of writing the two last books, which was not really his intention, it seems, that probably changes some things, right? But he still got all these things he was deliberately foreshadowing to come in the future, and he just hasn't gotten to them yet. So this was a revelation right at the end of that book. It makes perfect sense. It doesn't confuse me at all that half of it, the good part, would be true. The really interesting, wild part that catches you off guard, though it is foreshadowed when you go back and look. But then it turns out that the less interesting, okay, part of it wasn't true, and actually it sets up an even crazier, weirder reveal, right? And think about it this way, okay, what if I'm right? Doesn't it make sense to find these things out in stages? Should we expect to have learned that it was Lysa? If you're doing this, if all along he's thinking, one of the games going on here between Littlefinger and Varys is that Varys has been posing as Littlefinger in letters to Lysa Arryn and got her to kill her husband. In part, to stop Jon Arryn from blowing up the Lannister alliance, but to also ultimately have a way to get rid of Littlefinger. Well, doesn't it make sense that we would get part of that? It's a mystery. We would get, part of this revealed, especially now that we have Sansa, one of our heroes, in very close to Littlefinger. Littlefinger's now a bigger character in A Feast for Crows and probably A Dream of Spring than he has been previously in the previous books. And it makes perfect sense to me. Also, having Sansa not really be sure, he's saying he didn't. She's kind of just psychologically and practically kind of has to. Part of calling herself Elaine Stone is going along with his lies, is believing his lies. She doubts clearly, but what choice does she have but to go along with all this? And part of that maybe is sublimating those doubts, right? And that's interesting. So it makes sense to me that you would reveal this in stages. You'd prolong that part of the mystery. Okay, I'm not confused by that at all. And like I say, the time frame, I think he's
he's figuring out how to write all that, and it's hard. But he's not, those big points that he's thought of 25 years ago, like he's unlikely to change unless he really has to. So yeah, I might be wrong, but I guess what I'm saying is we'll see if larger numbers of people ever read this, but I haven't found any comments yet to convince me that I'm wrong about this. Or that I'm not at least really onto something. Okay, so now we've got, now going back in time, we'll go to Moon Messages episode 2, some new thoughts in more recent comments, I think, than I talked about in episode 2.1. So episode 2 is Lyanna's statue and Ned's disinheritance. Kid President, this is from a patron on Patreon. Kid President says, this answers the endless question, why wouldn't Ned just tell Cat the truth so well? If Lyanna was married, that makes Catelyn a rebel against King Robert for harboring a superior claimant to the throne. Maybe she can live with that and keep it a secret. But if Lyanna was married and Ned was disinherited, then Jon does inherit Winterfell over Robb, which I talk about as, that's Catelyn's huge fear that Jon or Jon's children will be rivals to Robb or his children for Winterfell. Catelyn, back to Kid President. Fuck. God damn it. Caitlin. Fuck. The internet has poisoned me. Caitlin, God damn it, would see Ned as a rebel against her own children by harboring a superior claimant to Winterfell. It's not a matter of whether Ned can trust Catelyn to keep a secret. Revealing the secret would be an act of violence against Caitlyn. God damn it. Completely. This says better. Like I talked about, I think just in the bonus episode maybe, about that this is like Cat's huge fear here. But I don't think I talked about the question of why Ned doesn't tell her, which is one of the big mysteries that people ask about. I was just watching a YouTube video about this the other day. I think, Robert, Indie Geek, who I was just actually watching a bit of his stream earlier. I don't think he's seen my videos. It is a real question. And there you go. He is a superior claimant by that logic. He has, in theory, a claim that is superior to anyone else in the North, Ned or Robb or whatever. So yeah, very, very key. That's why he doesn't tell Caitlyn. Next comment from Lucas Fetzko, who I think is a fairly new patron. I don't think I heard you mention this, but wouldn't this theory also align with having a Targaryen Stark in Winterfell to defeat the others / Long Night? I feel like that would give more meaning for Lyanna wanting a claim in the first place. Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like this was on my mind. Maybe I didn't say it in exactly this way, but like maybe I just sort of threw it away as like one of the possible motivations. Like, well, maybe Lyanna, maybe not just Rhaegar, but Lyanna is also a theory head, a prophecy head, and is thinking about, and their reason for wanting a Targaryen on the throne, or on the high seat at Winterfell, is for the coming battle that Rhaegar sees. Absolutely a likely possibility. Forgot about Dre says, interesting theory. I'm curious about something though. If Ned was disinherited this is another patron, for being warded with Jon Arryn, thus potentially influenced by him, the Vale, and not trusted to rule the North, why wasn't that the case with Robert? Robert is the oldest and less easy to put aside, but why wouldn't the Baratheons have sent Stannis as a second son who could be spared to the Eyrie instead of their heir Robert? I would say, so there's two questions here. And you kind of answer your first question with the second, which is like, in my thinking, well, do you trust the heir, or do you trust the son that has been sent off to ward, and maybe you need to take precautions to remove him from the line of succession because you're worried about, for all kinds of reasons, like the mistrust that Balon has for Theon. I think that is that you know in this case Robert was the Lord. So who are we talking about, like, setting him aside? There is no one. He is the Lord. And in that sense, like, also, it's harder for anyone to be concerned about his interests diverging. When you have your second sons who aren't going to inherit, well, they might want to, right? That's the issue. They might want to inherit, and someone might want them to, and they've been out of your influence for a while. So, there's that. I'll add that now I've talked about it on the last episode, but another commenter, I think on Patreon, brought up that the issue of, like, the possibility that the reason Ned is disinherited is because he was supposed to marry a Shara Dane and become the Lord of Starfall in a cadet branch of House Stark down there at Starfall. So that's a second reason that, like, that's a different reason, I guess, for why he might have been disinherited. So now you get to, like, why. So I think, like, yeah, the difference is, like, who's, Robert's interests are his own, basically. No one's, he's not going to be scheming against the Lord of Storm's End, or scheming for his own benefit, going against the family like Fredo, drawn into that because he is the Lord. And what's the second part of the question? Robert's the oldest. Why wouldn't the Baratheons have sent Stannis? Well, I think, like, why wouldn't they have sent Stannis? Well, in a way, like, I think the answer is it's the specific politics between the houses, like, that's who you might want to send your second son because they're your backup heir, which is, a certain amount of prestige and sacrifice and risk that you're offering in this system of diplomacy. On the other hand, you may be worried that, they may be subject to influence and thus may be dangerous to your house. It's all a spectrum of considerations. Whatever the thing was, like, that was the deal they struck. It wasn't for Stannis. It was for the Lord. You would have to look into that. Like, did their parents die before or after? I think before Robert goes to the Vale. I think he's there when, like, watching when they die with Stannis. I could be wrong about that, but that means, like, that's the deal that was made. Robert agreed to go and be warded, and whoever set it up, whether it's Crescent or other intermediaries, like, whatever, that's the deal they came to. They clearly all pass around both their heirs and their second and third and fourth sons, and it's just, I think it's just subject to whatever the situation. Okay, now back to YouTube. YouTube commenter Epic Parkour Dude says, wouldn't the betrothal of Lyanna to Bobby Baratheon contradict this? And this is the first moment that I doubted this. That I doubted the Ned's disinheritance theory. So what I would say to this is, it's a very good point. And I would say, in that discussion of this idea, in the extended discussion of this idea, like, there are lots of permutations of how this could have gone down. We've already talked about some of them. Like, is he disinherited because of mistrust, because of some in general or specific reasons, or is it because he's supposed to go inherit Starfall? And that's only the start. Another permutation is another, like, factor in those permutations is, like, is it that Lyanna was left specifically in the will, or was it just that Ned was specifically disinherited, and the way that it turns out in the end is that he, for his peace of mind and to cover his ass, has to trace his inheritance through her, because otherwise, and how that would make sense is, like, otherwise
it would go through. If they, they're not thinking. Another key to this is like no one's planning for Brandon to die, much less like at the same time as Rickard, and then without an heir of his own, without an heir of his issue, Um, and so what happens is really the next, unless you want to find something that says like somehow in the North, like the sisters are, the older sister is honored in the line of succession, the sort of baseline succession. I don't know about that, but it's really just that no one's planning on that. So it's probably just that Ned is specifically disinherited, and they've got the other son. They've got Benjen. So like, if you are thinking that you're like, well, I'm disinheriting my second son. Well, worst come to like, he's not the heir anyway. This is just precautionary, and I have a third son. And the question is like, when does it become clear that Benjen refuses to inherit? Did he really? But all this kind of doesn't matter as much if it's really just about like tracing his Ned ends up the Lord. Well, all these people are dead. Everyone thinks he's the Lord. He goes back, he is the Lord. So it's really just about him in his own mind and to cover his own ass in case things come up down the road, right? And so in that scenario, he just has to paint a picture of a succession that leads to him. And it goes through Lyanna because she's dead. It doesn't go through Benjen because then he would be the Lord. And he would either have to die or abdicate in favor of Ned, which defeats the whole purpose because Ned already is the Lord. So he can't go saying, it doesn't help him any in his sort of political calculation of this to go, okay, everybody, so I was disinherited. I'm not really the Lord. I know people all over the South have been calling me Lord Stark, and you got, ever since I arrived back at Winterfell, you've been saying Lord Stark. Everyone in the North assumes I'm the Lord here. Pump the brakes. Actually, by the documents and by what I've been told, actually Benjen has been the Lord since the death of my father and brother. But hey, he doesn't want it, so he's going to abdicate. Well, now that already, so now the only way that makes sense is, publicly letting everyone know he was passed over. He was specifically disinherited. That doesn't help him politically. This is all a secret that he's covering his ass on for later. So why? Because she's dead. That's why she needs a statue. And thank you to Epic Parkour Dude for pointing this out. In fact, I need to go back to that comment and respond to him with, I told him I would talk about this on this, but I need to give him that answer. Awesome. Okay. Thank you for sticking with me. I'm loving this. This is fun. We are all the way back to what are Varys and Littlefinger up to, the Catspaw dagger, and we've got, I'm going to guess that the G is silent and say this is Nosego. And that's a patron. Thank you, Nosego. It's got a comment on here, a newer comment. Where do you think this Littlefinger removal plan was when Varys was counseling Tyrion in King's Landing? It seems like Varys pumped the brakes despite Tyrion holding the cards and himself holding Tyrion's ear. Well, I mean, this is a good point, and it's something that gets brought up in lots of contexts. I feel like Preston Jacobs did a stream, discussing this as possibly the biggest plot hole. And as I recall, makes a ton of good points, as always. I would say this is stuff Preston talks about in that, and I think most people do talk about when this gets brought up. I think everyone sees the reasons that are presented. The question is how seriously do you take it, and do you see anything that doesn't make sense there? To me, I buy it, and what everybody brings up is that Tyrion wants to confront Littlefinger or deal with Littlefinger, and he is trying, but it's not so easy. Littlefinger, I would say, is actually holding
the cards. Nosego, I don't think Tyrion is holding the cards. He's the hand, but don't forget, Ned was the hand. And Littlefinger executed a coup, or counter coup, if you like, that resulted in Ned's arrest and Joffrey's ascension, ultimately Ned's death, because Littlefinger obviously controls the City Watch, the Gold Cloaks, and who knows who and what else. And so that's what Tyrion's doing, right? Is he's trying to dismantle, in a Clash of Kings, before he has to start worrying more about Stannis' invasion, he's trying to dismantle Littlefinger's power network that he knows about. So he gets rid of Janos Slynt. He and the other guy, he puts in both those names are right on the tip of my tongue. And he's proceeding along those lines, but he's walking. He has to tread very carefully, and he can't like Ned was holding that piece of paper that said he was regent, right? Well, that's more than from the king. That's more than Tyrion's holding. Tyrion just knows he needs to get rid of Littlefinger. He doesn't have Catelyn. God damn it. He doesn't have Catelyn to testify. Or, wait, Catelyn or Ned? He doesn't have Catelyn to testify to Littlefinger fingering him with the dagger. Like, that was Varys' plan. That Tyrion would make it back and the realm would still be together and there wouldn't be this war going on, and the Starks would be able to say, yeah, Littlefinger said it was his, and Tyrion would be able to say, actually, here's Robert and Aaron Santagar to say, no, it wasn't, or the threat of that, and be able to use that to use the Lannisters to have Littlefinger like killed in the black cells or something. So no, I think you can make a determination like whether you buy it and whether it's a blunder and whether he ultimately blows it. I think fair enough. Like absolutely he does. Littlefinger does get the better of him here, and he gets the better of Varys again. That's what I think. I think he's trying to get Ned to take out Littlefinger in the first book, and he's trying to get Tyrion to take out Littlefinger in the second book, and he blows it both times, and they both blow it for themselves, such that Littlefinger is still working in the world and almost kills Tyrion in A Storm of Swords, and ends up effectively framing him for Joffrey's death. Littlefinger's very powerful, so he's trying to pick away at Littlefinger to get to a point where he can attack, but he doesn't have much. Let's see. Okay. Back on YouTube. Maybe this was, well, I don't know what video this was on actually. So maybe it's the first part of Battle of Wind, but Prince Lucy, thank you for subscribing, says it's pronounced Catelyn, and I can prove it. Later, Arya and Sansa both have to adopt fake names. Arya has many, but one that stuck is Cat of the Canals. Sansa, under Littlefinger's guidance, has taken to being called Elaine Stone. Put them together and you get Catelyn. Catelyn. The daughters took their mother's name. So while George has said repeatedly, pronounce the names however you want, I made them up, the pronunciation of Catelyn's name is plot relevant. Very interesting. Very glad to have you subscribed. I'm going to have to say I do not subscribe to your analysis. Though it is very good and it's very interesting and obviously I think correct to point out that Elaine is similar to Catelyn. Certainly Cat of the Canals is Cat. She goes by Cat. I mean, let's get one thing cleared up. Her name is Caitlin, but she goes by Cat for short.
I call her Cat because that's what she goes by for short. I think that's absolutely the correct pronunciation. I literally know Caitlins who go by Cat. That's pretty normal. So the fact that so that part of it, like cat of the canals, like that's very much in sync. Now, where you have me is really at the extra syllable. Uh, Elaine Stone, Cat Ellen. Kate Lynn versus Cat Ellen. That middle syllable. And there's 2 syllables in Elaine. Thus, the argument here is there should be 2 syllables in Ellen, thus Catalin. Well, uh, I don't doubt there is a connection there for the author who, you know, you missed the point. You forget to mention the point about how he said he writes them to be read. Yeah, I think once you see that Arya is going by Cat, you can look at Elaine Stone and go, oh, okay, there is something similar there. The pronunciation, well, I'm not so convinced. I mean, they sound different. Why can't if the sounds are different, Prince Lucy, why not the number of syllables? They can still be similar. There's still a rhyme there. But like, Elaine, are you saying it's Cat Elaine? I don't think you are. Why? If it's really meant to be pronounced exactly the same way, like Cat and Cat of the Canals, why not? Why is her name not Elin by some spelling, either close to Catalan or something else that nonetheless is a homophone? It's not. They're different. So there. I'm sticking with Caitlin if I can manage in my head. It's more like an ideological position than something I actually remember to do when I'm talking because everyone says it that way. Anyway, that's what I've got for you today. Thank you so much. I have plans for some interesting stuff of a different character than we've done before coming. Obviously, I will be working on part 4 of the Battle of Wind series that I was trying to say theory and series, of which it is both. That will be coming eventually. That's Littlefinger. We'll see. But anyway, in the meantime, there's more stuff coming. Again, definitely check out the episode Interesting Nerd Club. I'll link it when I post this. So it'll be there. Yeah. If you're listening to this, if you don't know, you can from I think just from my page, you can copy if there's a little icon of a RSS feed, and you can copy your private patron RSS feed and paste it in to any podcast app, and it'll, like YouTube Music, for example. You have to like go in and like find where it allows you to add via VSS or RSS rather, but when in your podcast app, but then you paste that in there, but then this will show up there. Thank you so much. It means so much to me that you guys want to talk about this. Hit the comments. And of course that you would want to support this project and me and my life. It's making a huge difference in my life at this moment, and it really will continue to make a big difference in my ability to like do this project. Like as much as I want to like pay off what I owe in rent, I am also sweating like to do the Littlefinger episode. Like I need some. We have Littlefinger, the character, because I knew that episode was coming up and he needs to be dropped a couple of times, and we kind of thought ahead, but like, and so it was worth it to have him in the initial outlay, but like I need more, especially if it's not going to take a year. If it's going to fit the same style, and if it's not going to take a year, like finding the craziest, weirdest, like silent film shots that perfectly work. Of course, there's going to be a lot of those too, but I mean, like less of them. Yeah, I'm going to need some more stuff from Carl. So, thank you so much. And I'll see you next time. Well, wasn't that fun? Hours of me talking about Littlefinger and John Aaron and lots of other stuff. Thank you for listening to all that. Um, what I was starting to get into, the first thing in my preamble there, is that Littlefinger, is hearing that John Aaron, that he and Lysa killed John Aaron, and that she wrote to Cat. And she's like, "You were so clever to tell me to write to Cat and blame it on Cersei," which is perfect. When I didn't even catch it. I'm thinking like, okay, how that means that Varys, her pen pal, posing as Littlefinger, told her to write to Cat and blame Cersei, because that's the person who's like talking to her in secret about things. And it's like, oh, back up a minute. It doesn't know. That's perfect. It's perfectly confusing. But it makes perfect sense that John Aaron dies and Littlefinger, who has no idea, of course thinks it's Cersei, goes rather to Lysa and says, "You and little sweet Robin, our child together." I'm sorry, like I can't hold it in. That's a whole other video too. I cannot believe people have been exposed to this idea for so long and everyone poo-poos it like it's silly. It's so clear, so very clear. I will one day do a very convincing video that this is like the human motivations of Littlefinger. But yes, he's definitely Sweet Robin is definitely Littlefinger's um kid. And don't let anyone tell you like, uh well, what would it matter to the story? How would it improve the story? Shut up. The story isn't over. There's lots more story. You don't know what the story is. If you want to guess, if you want to look forward and try and guess, try and tell a story about what that would mean. I've told one to myself, and I think it it makes a lot of sense to motivate Littlefinger, including some of the crazy things he's going to have to get up to. Like I hint at in part 4 of the Battle of Wind, it may be that I think he probably will crown um, Sweet Robin, but ultimately it may end up, depending on the timing and how he plays it, it may end up being Harry who kneels. But that has to do with Littlefinger's motivations if Sweet Robin's actually his son. And think of what happens when Sweet Robin comes of age if he's the king of the mountains and Vale or whatever, and then or still just lord in his own right in the Vale. What happens to him then if Littlefinger lets that status maintain? Anyway, what was I saying? What's great, what's perfectly confusing is that he would go to her and say, "You need to get out of town with our kid. You need to leave now. This is dangerous. I'm going to stay because for reasons I think I'm safe, because I've been more careful." Like he's not going around with Stannis and John Aaron, even though he knows and is part of he knows what's going on. Um, you need to get out of town, and you need to write to Cat in your secret language, which I know about from Harrenhal. You need to warn her. You need to tell her uh, that that this is not a natural death. That Cersei has murdered. Uh, that you need to tell her that Cersei has murdered John Aaron, so that, and you maybe wouldn't say this, or maybe you would, so that ultimately Ned is persuaded, because that is what will persuade Ned to come south. I need him to come down here and be a power that can actually exercise the power of Robert's throne, because it's someone Robert actually likes and respects and will listen to and give that authority. I can't deal with this. I need someone on my side who has juice in this situation. And that's so perfect because it's perfectly confusing, as I keep saying. Like that because and it's that perfect scenario where he's coming to if Lisa's been in this pen pal correspondence, which another thing I'll add is that I now don't think it necessarily has to have been a long thing that was kept up. I think this is an emergency measure that Varys deploys closer to the time of the murder, where it's like she suddenly gets a note and is sort of quickly, because Varys knows all, as Littlefinger says in the first book to Cat. Like he knows what's going on. He knows she's in love with him. He knows uh, Sweet Robin is their kid. The so it's this short term thing. So then she does it, but again, she's been trained not to mention it. Like we only have this secret in our letters because Varys is listening. Ha ha ha. And so then he comes to her and she obediently doesn't discuss the letters and maintains the characters they play. And he's just telling her, you need to go. It had to have been Cersei. You need to tell Kat that it was Cersei. But you need to get out of here. Write that letter in code. And the irony being he's talking to the murderer. And she's not saying anything. She thinks she's talking to her co-conspirator. That's a perfect story. And it all of these things like why and what went down on the day of the coup are all things that Sansa can sort of slowly learn and, as I sort of barely discuss in the video, come to terms with because she's will come to understand how politics works and the life and death nature of all this and see Littlefinger's perspective and at least for a time, like understand that he did what he could, which is kind of will be heartbreaking, right? Um, so, an interesting, an interesting thing I get into in sort of the difference of my thinking between the first and second parts there is, you know, this idea of like imagining Littlefinger actually avoiding Lysa and not wanting to, because it's known that, and especially, if he's carrying on this affair, which again, he isn't carrying on the affair, so he has no reason to avoid her, right? And I kind of get to this in the bonus you just heard. If you back up, this also, there's this conflict. There's a bit of a conflict here, or there's a bit of a wrinkle here where it's like he's also going around bragging about his intimacy with the Tully sisters. About in one case he's wrong, but nonetheless, and it's like, how does this all fit together? And it's pretty simple. Uh, Sweet Robin's his kid. He acts cavalier about having nailed his boss's wife before they were married to deflect from the truth that John Aaron's heir, which he needed to like pass on the family name, which he couldn't get out of Lysa any other way, is, actually Littlefinger's kid, which is why Littlefinger's been brought to court and been given, why they're buddies. But they are friends. Just like so also the thing that conflicted with this for me, as I did mention a little, was like, I really think and now I'm more sure than ever that Varys, when he's talking about, well, there was someone who was close to the Aarons, who was a good family friend who came by to dinner and was familiar with the kitchens and the staff and then he says, the squire, Sir Hugh. And my thinking then, I'll just maybe make it a little clearer now, is like he's laundering, he's trying to launder this idea that this was Littlefinger, who he's trying to blame the murder on, without saying it, which is what he has to do. This is a longer discussion, but he is a courtier. Like, this is how he needs to act. So he says he wants Ned and us, the reader, to think about Littlefinger when he's describing a family friend, someone who's close to the Erins, who had his leave of the kitchens. And you and Ned are supposed to be thinking he's hoping about Littlefinger, and then he mentions the Squire, and this is Varys is hoping Ned's like, oh, Varys was talking about the Squire, but already having implanted the idea of Littlefinger in his head. So that he starts thinking about Littlefinger. Because Varys has set up Littlefinger to take this fall, at least in part. That's what I think about that. And that, again, that it makes sense that, no, they're very close. They hang. He is close to Lysa. They're not avoiding each other. That would be suspicious. In fact, it being an open secret and something that he brags about, and that he, was Lysa's first, is, and that he even has the distaste, and he has the distaste to say he was intimate with two of the High Lords of the Realm's wives when they were girls. Like, this deflects from what they would naturally fear would eventually be some suspicion. Most of a plot like that would rest on basically people's goodwill and political instincts to just not say anything. But that's a whole other discussion. Anyway, that's what I think about that. Another thing I get to, which I will just because my thinking is a little different in it now, is the murder of Joffrey. And this is interesting because I'm trying to, I think a lot of my thinking is the same. Yes, he's opportunistically saying, yeah, I meant to kill Joffrey for you. And he's really trying to kill Tyrion. He's really trying to kill Tyrion. And and then the question is, how do the Tyrells fit into this? Is it, and I think I maybe kind of land on that's fake. They don't have anything to do with it. I now kind of understand it's sort of so much more simple than that. It is like he tells Sansa, he makes sure they know that Joffrey is a monster. And it's also his analytical analysis of what they need is true, that he tells Sansa, which is they need Marjorie to marry and become queen to a king, but they don't need it to be Joffrey. And so he makes sure they know that, and then by whatever he guesses, he seems to want it to happen, or whatever, or maybe he's just looking back and telling that to Sansa to take credit for it. Actually, that makes sense too. My point is, because he's Littlefinger, by whatever method, though I have my ideas, knows that they're going to kill Joffrey. It is a sort of political calculation you can figure out and guess at, and he is sure it's going to happen. He knows they are doing it. It is them. They do kill Joffrey, the Tyrells. At the same time, he just uses that opportunity to try and kill Tyrion. And the joke of the whole thing is Joffrey takes both poisons. So he knows there's a regicide going to go down, and he tries to kill Tyrion to keep his hands clean so that it looks like he says to Sansa, you got to keep your hands clean. And he also says, what? Why would I kill Joffrey? I have no motive. And he explains that as sometimes you just got to keep your, I'm just a chaos agent. Keep your enemies guessing so they don't know what you're up to. But really, that's half true. He's saying if I had killed, what's really true, his real thinking is if Tyrion and Joffrey had died of poisoning on the same night, everyone's going to assume it was the same people who killed them both. And he has no motive for killing Joffrey. Thus, he is not a suspect in the double murder. Ta-da! Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Looks like the video is going live right now, part 4. It's now 5:01. I'm going to try and get this up so that you can watch it right after. There's a whole new. You've been watching. Oh, you already know this. You've been watching the brand new banner parade in 4K all this time. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. If you want to support this work, hit me up on Patreon. It has paid for at least the cash expenditures of this series. Hardly my time. Thank you so much.